I got an email from our daughter, Jenna, a few days ago. It had been a while since I'd heard from her. She's finishing up her exams before spring break. After she went back to school following Christmas, Jenna kept her distance and focused on her studies. Probably for the best, honestly. While she was away, my life pretty much fell apart, and my wife made a quick exit. Just like that. And there I was, spiraling for a while, trying to get my bearings. There was no point in pulling Jenna into the mess until I could make sense of things myself. Now that I have, I'll eventually have to sit her down and explain everything. Looks like the time might be coming up soon. Now Jenna's finally coming up for air and checking back in, and she's frustrated. Apparently, she's been trying to reach her mom but keeps getting a bounce back saying that Laura's email account has been canceled. And when she calls the home number, it just doesn't connect anymore. How come mom's goddamned email account is closed? She wrote. How come our phone line is disconnected? She wrote. Where are you guys? What is going on, Dad? She said finals would be over in a few days, and she was going to be driving back east with some friends, and she wanted to know what in hell she was going to be driving into. Now that was a good question, and it would take a damned long, involved answer. I took some time to think what I wanted to say to her. Finally, a few days later, I emailed her back. I figured she deserved the whole story, or at least what I thought it was from where I stood. And I had been working on it, writing down what I knew. Hi, Jenna, honey. You got a lot of questions, and it's going to take some telling to fill you in on everything. I hope you're sitting down, kiddo. Short version. Your mom don't live with me no more. Tad longer version. She don't live with me no more because she says that I'm the worst miserable excuse for a husband in the world, and she found someone else better to screw. Yep, you read that right, sweetie. I'll give you her new email ID at the end of this note. You can read her bullshit once you read my side of it. Neither of us has a landline phone anymore. I know, I work for a telephone company, but it don't make no sense for me to have one anymore. Mostly the only people who ever called it were salesmen, Laura's skaggy friends, or my old drinking buddies. I got no use for any of them no more. I do have a new cell phone, and I'll give you that number, too. By the way, you can call Laura, too. She uses Glenn Parker's cell phone number now. Yeah, you read that right, too. I'll give you a-hole's number so's you can talk to Mom. I know that you're driving back with some friends and that you'll be able to get online here and there. So this email is to fill you in about the above stuff and what has happened. Just to let you know, you ain't the only one who's been bugging me about what the hell is going on. There's some of your mom's folks and mine, too, and a bunch of friends scattered around the country. I guess most people here in town know at least some of it. Hell, your mom and me have been the town entertainment for some time now, or so I've been finding out. So, I'm attaching that to this email as a Word document. Open it up and read it. But you don't have to weep. LOL. Jenna, I know you won't mind my language, but if you let your friends read it over your shoulder, which is perfectly fine with me, I got nothing to hide, well, I hope they ain't too old maidenish. I still talk the way I always have. I may have been an English major in high school, but that was for the reading. It never changed the way I talk. To whoever, but mainly Jenna. It's gonna be hard to tell my story. I'm not normally a talk-it-out, wordy kind of guy. Leastways not about real life. I wish I had some of those great writers I loved from high school here to write for me. Here goes. My wife Laura always used to complain that I don't talk to her. She called it communicating. Vince, she said 100,000 times. Oprah and Dr. Phil and everyone else says married people have got to make an effort to communicate more. And you don't. And I'm scratching my head at that. Hell, I think I communicate. I tell her when I'm going to be out with Glenn and the other guys. Like, hey Laura, don't wait dinner on me. I'll be eating mucho baby tacos at the happy hour at Briscoe's. Or, honey, tonight's the first big interleague game between the Cubbies and the Sox. Me and Glenn'll be heading there right after work. Now, ain't that communicating? Well, I'm kidding a little bit, obviously. But it seems to me, looking back, that I was trying to communicate early in the marriage. I had my things I liked, and Laura had hers. But I tried to show some interest in hers. I can't tell you how many times I'd say something like, hey, honey, you got that book club thing tonight, right? How about I catch a quick shower and I'll go along with you? But she never went for it. She'd make some excuse, but it always came down to her thing was for her alone. And forget about her doing any of the things I liked. She always dismissed it all as guy stuff. Well, sure, if none of our wives would ever come along. We bowled. We spent time drowning golf balls. I'd see women out there with their husbands doing those things. But not mine. I asked her lots of times why we couldn't do more stuff together. And she'd look at me like I had two heads. And she did not want to talk about it. After a while, I just got tired of trying and just went out with the guys. But again, looking back all through our marriage, Mrs. Great Communicator, a.k.a. Laura, Sure as hell wasn't. Oh, I forgot my name is Vincent Moretti, but everyone calls me Vince. And Glenn that I mentioned? Glenn was my best friend. As in was. The first thing I gotta say is, they're gone. Laura and Glenn. Together. I didn't know that right away. They took off together during the day on the Monday following the last Bears regular season game in the first week in January, which Glenn and me had both gone to. Later on, I'll tell you something about that to show the kind of selfish prick Glenn is. Oh, yeah. Well, I gotta tell you something about Glenn and me. See, we've sort of been best buddies for years and years. At least I thought so. What it is with the Bears tickets, I own rights to 2 seats. So, every year, we'd split the cost. Money was tight sometimes, and those tickets are too expensive for a working man like me. So, we'd go to the games together. When we won, we'd drink to Brian Urlacher, the best middle linebacker ever. When we lost, we'd curse out that idiot Rex Grossman. Then we'd get shit-faced at Benny's bar afterwards and pass out after we staggered home. I mean, I did. I don't know what Glenn did, but all season long he was in no better shape than me by the end of the day, so I guess so. When there was an away game, we'd just go to Benny's and get an early start on getting shit-faced. It all wound up the same whether the Bears was home or away. The big difference was I came home to a pissed-off Laura, and he went home to an empty rented room. Next day I drag my butt into work at Telco and spend the day nodding over people's broken phones or back in their telephone junction box closets. It was hell getting my trouble calls done, but I always could grit my way through. Hell, I know the repair stuff cold. Drunk or sober, hungover or feeling great, they always get my best effort. Best effort just takes a while longer when I'm hungover. He'd just sleep in. Glenn didn't care about what he did for a living or how hard he worked. Getting by was his ultimate ambition. He had and lost a lot of jobs over the years, but never seemed to have any trouble getting another one after screwing up and getting fired. He could charm his way though anything, I guess. That was the way it went all through the season, like every other season before that. But after that game, that Sunday night, when we was at Benny's, Glenn had 1 beer and then bailed out. He said he had something to do, so I had to get shit-faced without his help. Tough job, but I managed. And then came the next day, Monday, after that last Bears game. I dragged my hurting butt out of the sack that Monday, feeling like shit and dead tired, went to the plant, and flogged myself to put in a halfway decent day's work for Telco. When I went home after work that Monday, I was really dragging, but right away I could see things were majorly different. All of her clothes and personal gear was gone. First clue? I could actually see the countertop in the bathroom. It was pink. At the time that even sounded funny to me. Then it gotta be not so funny. Just like that. Because Laura left me a letter. I sat down to read it and it was a good thing I did, because I almost passed out when I realized what she was saying. She told me what a boring, lazy, selfish, ugly, disgusting, fat slob I was. In those words, she told me she and a man she didn't name had been screwing for over a year now, and they were in love. He was a real man. Not like me and my needle Willie, she told me, and they were going to get away and make a new life somewhere off to the west in the sunset. Jenna, I hadn't cried in a long time. Not since I was a little kid, but I cried that night. Real big girly man tears, sitting at that table with that nasty, shitty, ball-busting note crumpled in my hand. After a while, I had to go into the John and throw up. By the 4th or 5th round, you got nothing left in you, so you're just throwing up gastric juice and stomach lining. But eventually my stomach got tired of retching and settled down to a sullen, queasy rumble. After all those years, you think you know someone. Let me go back a little. A bunch of us, we all grew up together in Endicott City. Me and Glenn and Steve and the others, and all the neighborhood girls too. Laura was a real tomboy until she started to develop at 13, but so were many of the other girls. We all went to school together. We played together and fought each other over stickball games and stuff like that. Then when Laura grew tits, she turned into a little tease. She knew what she had and she played us for fools for a while. Glenn and me fought over her all the time. Eventually I won. I guess. Now they're gone. Just like that. Well, at first, I didn't know about how it was him. I thought she had gone off with some nameless a-hole. Make that nameless a-hole with a giant meat. I was a needle Willie, remember? First, I knew of it. I called everyone I knew, looking for her. Her folks, my folks, her friends, her boss, you name it. Now, that call to her boss was a real treat. I had never called, or even spoken with the woman before. I found the temp agency number in an old address book, and included was a cell phone number. I dialed it up. It seems like Laura's boss was still pretty pissed at her. She had quit, with no notice. The boss had come in one day, and there was no Laura at her desk, and later he got an email telling him she was gone. Just like that. So, a little more mystery, but so what? That happened a year ago. Every Tuesday through Friday for the past 12 months, Laura got up with me and went out the door with me. I went to work. Where did she go? Well, I had a clue. Now. And when I'd come home, I'd ask her how her work went, and she'd say with a straight face, she was worn out. She must have really enjoyed screwing with me like that. I can't tell you how I was. I still got a pretty good vocabulary from all that reading in school, but I couldn't come up with the words, except that I felt like a walking dead man. Laura, the only woman I had ever loved, the woman I had never cheated on, had screwed around behind my back with some guy. For a year. And now she had run off with him. Oh, and she had emptied out our bank accounts, too. Good luck paying the bills, Vince, you needle-willy loser. I didn't know what to do. I sure as hell didn't feel like doing what I'd been doing for the past years. Going out for a few brews with the guys or going bowling or shooting pool or anything like that. Suddenly that guy stuff wasn't appealing anymore. Guess that showed how freaked out I was. One thing kept bothering me as I made those calls. Some of her friends and her mom didn't seem that surprised. It was like, oh, yeah, okay, I see, sorry to hear it, Vince. Like they knew it was bound to happen. Not in those words. They never exactly said that, but I could hear it in the way they wasn't surprised. I'm no Dr. Phil, but even a thick-skulled knucklehead like me could get it. I got it that they'd known, or maybe suspected stuff about Laura that I had never suspected. It was pretty late that Monday night when someone finally called me. Well, they might have called earlier, but I was on the phone so much, I'd have never known it. Things have been pretty rough for the last few years financially, and we had barely been getting by. We had a top-of-the-line telco instrument, because I got it for nothing. I went on a service call, and the phone was busted. I put in a replacement instrument, but when I took it back to the plant, I already knew what was wrong. And I knew I could fix it. But somebody sometime made this policy decision that we don't repair. We replace and toss the busted item away. So I asked my boss if I could have it. Being the a-hole that he is, Tony said, toss it in the dumpster, like you're supposed to. After that, I don't give damn whether you go fish it out. So I did, and it works fine. So I had the phone, but I couldn't afford the telco service package, even at the discount. Instead, I had a cheap phone service package from someplace. It was basic Stone Age technology, E&M, and a ringer. It didn't have all that fancy stuff, like caller ID or star 69 or a call going to voicemail. There was no voicemail. You miss me or Laura, you miss us. Call us back. Oops, I forgot. Whoever reads this might not know our industry lingo. E, ear, and M, mouth, means 2 wires each for the earphone and the mouthpiece. The ringer circuit can be done without running more wires. An instrument is a fancy word for phone. Fred Flintstone used an instrument like that to call Barney Rubble. If I didn't already have the telco phone, I guess the phones would have been tin cans connected by a string. Half the guys I know had the same kind of X-brand service deal. Hell, there were a few guys who couldn't even afford that. A lot of things that people used to think were necessities now are luxuries, special treats. With some of the mills and plants around here permanently shut down, a lot of folks are lucky if they can even make their mortgage payments. And then there's the old Hope Hatchling arsenal. They bracked it, shut it down by act of Congress, and just like that, 1,150 jobs were wiped out. At least my job with telco felt steady, but when the last contract expired, we had to take a 13% pay cut just to hold on to our health and dental insurance. Management pleaded poor mouth, said they were barely breaking even. And I hate to have to agree with our stupid management, but telco does have high maintenance costs. And some other problems too, like shitty customer service. But I will say this much. If they just put someone in charge who actually understand what telco really does and how things really work, we wouldn't have so many problems. Maybe I'll tell you more about that later too. Bottom line, I could pay most of the basics, but there was always more stuff that Laura needed. Lots of stuff. And she had to have her walking around money. And she kept charging a lot of stuff. So I started working a little side job at a small shop repairing appliances to bring in more Glenn. It was for us. Us? Oh, Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, just gimme a minute, will ya? I'm sorry. I got all blurry-eyed, and the next thing, I was just losing it. You'd think I'd be getting used to the idea by now. Us? There ain't any us no more. Well, enough of the hard times of our miserable world. There were plenty who was having a harder time than us. I mean, oh hell it. Me, I, us, we. Look, I'll just keep saying it like I think it. Okay? You put in whatever pronouns you want. Okay? You know what I mean. So, back to Monday night after that last Bears game. I'm home and she's gone, and I had that note to remember her by. Me and my needle Willie. I had run out of calls to make. Nobody had any idea where she was with her unknown Big Willie lover. And then, like I said, I finally got a call coming in. It was from Steve Rogers, one of the gang we hang out with, me and Glenn. He asked where was I? I said, well, since you got me at home, I must be at home, idiot. Why? The poker game, you dummy, he said. Geez, I've been calling you for a couple of hours. You was always busy. Don't you remember? Sully was gonna set it up at that club downtown? Shit, yeah, I remembered. Now that the NFL season was over, we'd have nothing to do Monday nights. So Sully set up this poker night in a back room at his brother-in-law's strip joint. Well, it's more of a titty bar than a real strip joint, and there wasn't supposed to be any sex happening. But I've been there a couple of times to have some beers and eyeball the titties. We all knew that the topless girls lap dance you for a tin, and they'd go in the back room with you if you flashed a 20 at them. Some of the guys did it. Glenn did, all the time. But he was single, so there was no cheating involved. But the whole thing bothered me. These girls were the ages of our daughters. Hell, they were somebody's daughters. And they were local, I was pretty sure of that. My Jenna, who's in college on a merit scholarship, probably went to high school with some of these girls. I was not a cheater to begin with. I got my faults, but I meant what I said when I said I do when Laura and me got married 22 years ago. I did some of my screwing around late in high school when Laura broke up with me and paired off with Glenn for a while. Then after graduation, I joined the Navy where they taught me my trade. I became an IC electrician, which, IC was short for interior communication. We was the Navy's telephone guys. After school I spent 2 years at sea, and the last 2 years stationed in Japan. I got a lot of sex on that assignment. No pros either. There were lots of modern Japanese girls that liked to screw around as long as you bought them nice things and showed them a lot of the nightlife. Not much different from high school except for the honey-colored skin and those Asiatic eyes. They were damned hot little babes. No regrets either. We was both there for a fun time. I blew a lot of money on those honeys. When I got out of the Navy, I figured Laura and Glenn would be all married and stuff. But no, she wasn't even dating him anymore. She caught him cheating on her. Again. See, Glenn had a rep as being a great lover with his looks and his big Johnny. I'd seen him in the locker rooms, and he had an easy 2 inches on me. Far as I could see, I was normal. Maybe a tad short of it, but I never had any complaints. Well, at least not until recently. But Glenn also had a rep of wanting to spread his seed around, whether he was going steady or not. I heard they were together and then not, and Laura would date other guys. And then they'd get back together. That went on for the 4 years I was gone. And when I got back, Laura looked as good to me as she had back when we was going steady. So we met and talked and the old feelings came back. She seemed a lot nicer and more caring. Much less of a flirt and a tease. She told me Glenn had broken her heart several times with his cheating, and that made her think about how nice it had been back when she had been with me. Well, I was still carrying a torch for her, and so we got married. Glenn got married too, twice. But he seemed to have trouble keeping it in his pants, and so both his marriages only lasted a couple of years. Me, I didn't ever cheat on commitments I made. So, back to the topless girls. I never indulged with what might have been my daughter's high school pals working at the titty bar. It just was not in me to do that. And to tell the truth, I lost a lot of respect for the guys who did. They were mostly married and all around my age, like mid-40s. I guess all they thought of was young women. All I could think of was that given some bad breaks, Jenna could have been one of those girls. It doesn't take much to make you desperate, not in this economy nowadays. So here was Steve reminding me that I should have come to the game tonight, and that it was still going on. I looked. It was only 9:30. I asked if the dancers there were acting as waitresses for the game. He said yes. I asked if they were making money off the guys. Steve knew what I meant. Well, you know, sure. They're pretty hot looking, and up close and personal, if you know what I mean. Hell, they're old enough and they're up for it, he said. But I was thinking of something else outside of the hang-ups I had about the girls. Taking care of your family. Most of these guys was having a tough time paying their bills. Those 10s and 20s needed to go for meat and potatoes for their families. A little penny stakes poker game was one thing, but 10s and 20s? How irresponsible was that? I asked Steve if Glenn had been going back for seconds with the girls. Steve said no, he hadn't seen Glenn. That he'd been trying to call him too, to get him to come out. But no luck so far. The guy was also among the missing. So how about it? He said. I said no. I said I had too many troubles eating at me to want to watch other guys go off and screw young women who were their daughters' ages. Steve knew I meant him, so he got pissy and told me to go screw myself and slammed down the phone. So I was back alone with my thoughts. I was putting 2 and 2 together, and the same math worked like it did back in school. Glenn hadn't called me tonight, the best I knew. If he had tried and hadn't gotten through, 'Cause of a busy signal, I knew he'd have just jumped in his big SUV and come over and walked right in, but he hadn't. He also hadn't gone to a place where he was guaranteed to get laid. He made less than I did, but he lived rent-free in a trailer so he could afford it. But he hadn't. Hell, he was a good enough looking guy that I was pretty sure he'd get laid for discount prices. When we used to run together as single guys, the girls called us Beauty and the Beast, and you can guess who was who. Now, even the girls at the club went for him. It was 10-10 now, but I was thinking certain things, and I decided I had to know. So I dragged my butt out to the car and drove over to his trailer, but by then I knew what I would find. It was gone from its free spot behind the printing shop where he worked part-time. And so was the big SUV. That's what he would have hauled the trailer with. Wife and all her shit gone. Best friend gone. His trailer containing all his shit gone. That added up to 2 + 2 = 4, which if you look it up in the big book of life meant I was screwed. My wife, on who I had never cheated outside of a few stray thoughts here and there because I was human, had been screwing around on me with my former best friend for a year or more, and they was gone. I remembered her note, telling me what was wrong with me, and she was running off with a guy who was not a needle willy, and they were going to make a new life off somewhere. Something like that. I had been pretty shaken up and starting to cry as I read it that first time, so I thought maybe I didn't read it right. Well, I took it out when I got back home and read it again. Slowly. Vince, I'm sure you spotted that there's no deer up there. That's because there is nothing dear about you. You are a boring, lazy, selfish, ugly, disgusting, fat slob. I haven't made love with you in years. I've just endured sex. I could barely stand having sex with you, and you were too dense to know the difference. I have been making wonderful, mind-blowing love with a gorgeous, beautiful, caring man for over a year now. His has been giving me pleasure that I could only dream about when I'm with you and your pathetic little needle willy. I let you screw me whenever you wanted because it hardly bothered me, except to have to fake once in a while. I was ready to leave you months ago, but he wanted to wait until the right time. And that time is now. He called me Sunday and told me to get packed and ready. We are going far away to start a wonderful new life together. I won't even bother with divorce and all that because I don't care. I am secure in his love and in his arms. He's a changed man now. I guess you can divorce me if you want, although it hardly seems worthwhile for you. Who would ever want to marry you, the way you are? Well, Vince, I just came back to finish this, and I read this over again, and I have to say that I was a little harsh, maybe a little too harsh. You are a halfway decent man in some ways, and you worked hard to be a good provider. Maybe you can find some lonely older woman who'll be willing to settle for what you are. But I can't. Laura, I was tearing up again. Shit, it was easier on me the way I had remembered it before. Reading it carefully hammered me around the heart a lot more. Well, she sure as hell communicated her feelings. Oprah would have been proud of her. I didn't know which hurt the most, that she had run off, or that she had run off with my supposed best friend, or that she had run off and taken the trouble to write that letter as her parting shot. God, how she must hate me. No, must have hated me for a long time. That list. I looked at it and my heart sank, because I couldn't argue much with it. Boring, lazy, selfish, ugly, disgusting, fat, slob. Oh, and the topper. Needle Willie. I was stumped for the name. I went online and looked it up. I was the personification of the 7 deadly sins of a shitty husband. That was me. Well, it depended on how you counted them. I count fat slob as 1 and add Needle Willie as the 7th. But that's just me. Rearranging the old deck chairs. Like it mattered. Shit, the old Laura, the one I thought I knew, would have been proud of me for seeing it that way, in those words. In the days that followed, I had a whole lot of free time to think about my sins. I went to work every day. I had to take a couple hours off to get tested for STDs, because I knew that Glenn screwed around all the time, and you never know. I checked out clean, and did again over several months. I went on trouble calls. I did my job as professionally as I could. In fact, now even more professionally. For some reason, that was even more important to me now than it usually was. What did that mean? Even more professionally? Well, in the normal way of things, after a while, you begin to pick up little ways to slide on the job. You take 45 minutes to do a job and write it down as 60, and you go have a Coke for 15 minutes. Little things like that, things that you see the old-timers do when you first start out. Some guys took it pretty far in padding their hours. And there were some who had something else going by taking parts that had failed and fixing them up and selling them to a guy who sold them online. I heard it might be Sully's brother-in-law, the guy who owned the titty bar. Telco had a policy that if a part failed, you toss it and put in a new one. If you brought it back, they'd just toss it anyway. They didn't want to bother with handling bad equipment and trying to get it repaired. Not worth the trouble, they said. Whoever they were. The customer was always billed for a new part, which had a big markup. But personally, I thought it was some kind of fraud for the technician to hang on to it, fix it up, and resell it. See, the markup was fantastic. You got the busted part for free, it cost you nothing or peanuts to fix it, and you got the OEM price less 10%. It was a scam, and there were guys that did it routinely to pad their income. It didn't sit right with me. I never did it. I could have used the extra money, but it just didn't feel right. The hardware wasn't my property. I guess if you went and dug it out of the dumpster, after it was tossed, then it was free for all. That's one thing. But the guys were just doing the job, putting in the replacement, fixing the failed part, and running it over to the back door of the titty bar. In fact, I think some of them went flat out crooked. They told the customer that the phone was bad when it wasn't. That way they didn't even have to repair the damn thing to get paid for it. Goddamn thieves. And there were many other things that guys did that cheated old telco. They all amounted to doing as little work as you can get away with, and still look like you were doing your job. Some guys do 4 hours work, disappear for half a day, get paid for 8, and work another part-time job in the stolen 4 hours. Double dipping on top of timesheet fraud. Some others do the same deal with the stolen hours and spend their stolen time at some neighbor's house, screwing away on their neighbor's bored, horny wife, or tapping some other bored, horny wife they'd met on their service calls. None of that was ever my style. Like I said, I don't cheat. Not on my wife and not on my company. Before, I admit, I did used to pad my calls for a little time here and there so I could go goof off on company time a little. Like go and grab a Coke or a quick burger. I guess too much of that got me to be a fat slob. Well, that and the beer. No more. There was nothing I wanted to do with that stolen time anymore. All it did was give me more time to think about my sins. So I worked every job dead square on the clock. If it took 39 minutes to do the job and get it signed off, I logged it as 39 minutes. An average of 6 minutes later, I'd be pulling up to the next place with a trouble call. I was working as hard as I could and as well as I could, and I was trying to feel as good as I could about my work. It seemed to be all that I had left, not counting Jenna, who was out of the picture right then. But even as I drove myself hard at work, I kept thinking about those 7 husbandly sins. And when I got home, that was pretty much all I thought about. I had no interest in the tube, or going out drinking, or playing poker or pool or any of that guy's night out stuff. I didn't want to be out with anybody. Hell, everyone I knew, when I looked in their eyes now, I thought I could see that they knew or maybe had already known about Laura and Glenn and had looked down on me as a pathetic clueless cuck. Yes, I went online and looked that up too. I didn't hang around with or kid around with the other guys at work for that reason. Same for the women in the offices down there. There were a lot of women of all ages in the offices and the parts warehouses and such. When I ran into them, I thought I saw a lot of the same scorn as in the eyes of the guys, but maybe also some pity. I pitied myself enough. I hated facing other people's pity. I knew that I had to be realistic. Laura was gone for good. Hell, if Glenn dropped dead tomorrow, so what? She'd just find someone else. And if she got some lame idea about crawling back? After the way she unloaded on me in that letter, there was no way, pal. And that made me have to think, geez, what about dating, about seeing other women, and about sex? But it sure wasn't likely to be in this century, the way I felt. Call it what you want, but I was just plain scared. I was the boring, lazy, selfish, ugly, disgusting, fat slob with the needle willy, remember? I figured, who would want to go out with me, with what everyone knew about me? I knew my marriage was over, but right then I couldn't see any future that included any woman in my life except for Jenna. When you got right down to it, I was a flop as a husband. The separate lives, the wasting time on useless stuff, the spending my free time with other flop husbands, etc. Fine. I screwed up and it's come back to bite me in the butt. But then I thought that not every wife with a husband like me goes off screwing another guy and takes off. So just being a complacent, lazy, unappreciative guy isn't really enough to open the door to something like that. I must have been much worse than that. Hell, those guys who were screwing around behind their wives' backs weren't getting dumped, and some of their wives must have known, or at least suspected. So it had to be something really bad about me. And this isn't giving a pass to Laura. She chose to betray me and the marriage and Jenna. But I can't get in her mind. Only mine. And once I get past the staying out with the boys stuff, I keep going back to everything that Laura and I did since we got married. We laughed together, cried together, made all kinds of love, all kinds of places. We shared and nursed each other through illness. We shared Jenna's birth and her sicknesses when we felt helpless and just got on our knees together and prayed for her to live. We shared a whole life together. I gave her everything I had. I never cheated. I busted my butt to support her. And in the end, No matter what reason she had, I came up short. That's what it comes down to from my end. A failure as a man and as a husband. I got nothing else to give. That was all there was of me. Looking forward, what kind of a future can I see? I'm certifiably ugly. And when I think about possible companionship and sex, I gotta ask myself, what the hell can I offer another woman that's more than I already tried and failed with? I just couldn't think there was any chance of my getting anything going with another woman. Hell, I was so burned out. I didn't even know if I could perform. That letter cut more out of me than my heart. I was getting myself set up for a long, bleak life. And maybe I deserve it. Why the hell did it always seem easier to just go out with the guys so much? What was the big attraction? Why did I give up on trying to be a couple with Laura? So, I worked my 8 hours and any overtime that was offered and went straight home. And there, I stayed away from booze. It wasn't going to make me a better man or lover, or husband or father. So I had no use for the hard stuff. I had found myself sliding in that direction at first, stopping in at a bar for a couple of quick pops. I quit that cold. So I went straight home, where I had a lot of time to think about the 7 sins. They were the immediate things. There was nothing I could do about my past mistakes and screw-ups. But like I said, I even went round and around on whether they were 7 or 8. I always packaged up fat slob together like they was one sin. I obsessed over trivial shit like that. But I already mentioned that. See, that's what I meant about going round and round over the same arguments. But I couldn't seem to stop myself. I would spend hours just going over it in my mind, going over and over the same ground. Boring. I tried to see myself from Laura's point of view, or from anyone else's, like her friends. Much as I hated to admit she was right, my own verdict was guilty as charged. I was boring. And here I go again, over the same ground. This is so depressing. All my free time had been spent watching sports on TV or hanging out with my guy friends, like Glenn and Steve and Sully, bowling with the guys, drinking beer with the guys, shooting pool with the guys, going to games with the guys. What an empty way to kill time. And I'd come home half in the bag and watch some stupid reality show and fall into bed. Sure, the other guys weren't any better than me, but so what? That didn't excuse me. And their wives didn't run out on them. Then I thought that I wasn't being fair to Glenn. He had found a much less boring way to spend some of his time, screwing Laura, my loving wife. Sorry, I'm supposed to be talking about my sins. I had to wonder what might have happened if I had spent some more of that time with Laura. She used to like to read. In high school, she wrote poems and stories. Maybe I should have found some things to do with her. Well, to be fair to me, like I told you, I did try a little at first, and she wasn't interested. Maybe I should have tried harder to join her in her interests. Maybe I shouldn't have given up. I should have tried harder. But I didn't. There were book clubs and things, weren't there? Christ, I wasn't a moron. I'd read a ton of books in school. I could read a book. I could look things up in Wikipedia. I could have tried more. Why didn't I try harder? Would that have made a difference? I beat myself up with that, over and over. But then I thought, what difference would it have made? There were the other 6 sins, weren't there? What good would it have done to shape up on one with the others still there? Lazy. Again, I looked at myself, and it wasn't good. I spent so much time and energy out with the guys that when I was home, all I wanted to do was sit around like a slug and watch the tube. I spent all my working days fixing things, and when I got home it took major negotiations to get me up off my lazy, but to fix a dripping faucet or a loose hinge. Guilty as charged. I was a pretty useless lump around the house. Over the years, I got so's I never wanted to go anywhere. We got so we never did much as a couple except for holiday parties at work or going out to a neighborhood block party or barbecue, and I looked on those as obligations. Chores. Things to be endured. Jesus, I used to be more fun than that. If I had lived with me, I'd have called me lazy too. Selfish. Christ, I had to throw in the towel right away. Now, I'll say this in my defense. I don't think I was selfish with money and as a breadwinner. I worked hard to keep Laura happy with stuff she needed or wanted. But that's just money. I was selfish with my time and attention, no question. Always out with the guys. Never time to stay at home and, here it comes again, communicating. Maybe those things are more important than mere material things and guy stuff. I was selfish with my free time. See, all of these things, these sins, were all rolled up in the way I chose to spend my time and live my life. I did what I wanted. And it didn't do me any good to say that there was a time when I wanted to do everything with Laura, and that she wanted to do her own things, her clubs and meetings. I wanted to go with her. I offered a bunch of times, but she said they weren't really right for me. She had gone to junior college for a couple of years, and she said I wasn't up to understanding some of the finer things. Translation. I was a peasant, and she didn't want me to embarrass her. What? Like with, who's this Shakespeare jerk? Like I would ever say that. Damn. I studied Julius Caesar in high school English class. I dug it. That's why I declared for English as a major, so I could read some of the other plays and other things. We staged some scenes from the play, and I played Brutus. Well, in the play I thought he was a loser, but he sure had some fine speeches. I remembered something I once memorized to play Brutus. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. Well, I guess I have lost my venture, if you think of my marriage as a venture. I failed at that venture, all right. I don't know if it's right to mention Mr. Shakespeare in the same breath as my poor problems, but it's amazing how he could write something 400 years ago for that schmuck Brutus to say that absolutely flat out nails me now, tonight, sitting in my empty house. I sure as hell failed to catch the tide in terms of whatever was going on in Laura's mind. Ugly. Well, what the hell am I supposed to make of that? I've seen my face every day in the mirror since I was old enough to wash my hands without help. I see myself in photos. Hell, my face is on my ID badge. I took my picture ID it from the desk and looked at it, trying to see it like I was a stranger seeing me for the first time. I had to remember that thing about Glenn and me, Beauty and the Beast. I wasn't handsome, that was for sure. But ugly? I mean, I dated girls in high school, and scored with some of them, too. I screwed around in the Navy. I liked some girls and they liked me, and sometimes things would happen. Like every smart, hopeful high school kid, I always carried protection, and the same goes for when I was a swabby. Would all of those girls, and some of them were lookers, too, have gone to bed with an ugly guy? I mean, there couldn't have been that many girls up for that, could there have been? But then again, I was the beast. I stared at the photo, and then went to the bathroom and studied my face again. I remembered something else from high school Shakespeare. An ill-favored thing, sir, but mine own. Looking at myself, I thought. Another point for Mr. Shakespeare. Ill-favored but mine own about sums it up. And the more I looked at my face, the more ill-favored I seemed to get. Maybe I wasn't that bad when I was younger, but now my face had got a little jowly from putting on that weight. I seemed to have picked up these lines on my brow and cheeks. That was the way my thoughts usually ran on a typical night. I never got any further in the endless, circular mental argument than ugly. By then I'd be bushed and sad. So one night, I got tired of thinking around and around in circles and decided to do some research on that one particular sin. The rest could wait. Hell, it wasn't as if I had anything better to do with my free time. Oh, and I didn't need to spend any time on the fat slob thing. That was dead on. I knew I'd been getting porky. I knew I was wearing a bigger waistband by a couple inches. I knew I'd had to go up a shirt size to XL in my Telco logo shirts. Starting the day after Laura had gone, I worked my way up to 30 minutes a night on her abandoned stationary bike and another 30 on my dusty old Bowflex. I had no argument about fat slob, but it was one of the few things I could do something about. So I started that up and never stopped it. Like I said, when I was alone in the house, what else did I have to do with my time? How could I work on the ugly thing? I mean, I couldn't really do anything much about it at 45, but I got this burr under my saddle. I had to know how bad it was. When I got good at my trade in the Navy, it was because the Navy instructors had taught me to be systematic. Solving technical problems was what we call troubleshooting. It's a systematic way of going at problems in a rational way, eliminating things, taking careful measurements at key points, and always looking to narrow down potential problems until there was only the one thing left, the fault. I set out to do the same with this question. Is Vince Moretti ugly? No. Make that a little more reasonable. Is Vince Moretti that ugly? As low as I felt, there was no way that any possible answer could make me feel worse. This was the second week in January, and Laura had been gone 10 days. 10 days of beating myself up so bad, I felt like I was lower than whales hit. A couple days went by before my work took me back to the home office at midday, and it happened to be a Friday. Normally, I only got back late Friday to turn in my paperwork for the week. But this time I had gotten a heads up on my next service call, the first scheduled after lunch, and I already knew what I needed to fix it. Like I said, I was pretty good at this troubleshooting. So I got the part one needed from the spares window, put it in my lockbox in the back of the truck, and walked back into the main building. I had been thinking about who to approach about this, who to talk to. I knew I needed a woman's opinion. What? Am I supposed to walk up to some guy and ask him what he thought of my looks? Get real. The question was, which woman should I ask? Right away I knew. Nora Ashford, an office manager, and she had always seemed friendly. She had been one of the women who had looked at me with some kindness in those first few days after it all had happened, and seemed to have become common knowledge. I had mainly seen warmth and sympathy in her eyes. Not pity. Oh hell, pity, sympathy. Maybe they were the same thing. But whatever the hell it was, it looked nicer in Nora's eyes than in most of the other women's. So I decided to find some way to talk to Nora Ashford. All I knew about her was that she was smart, divorced, and pretty open and friendly. And very nice looking. Maybe a couple of years older than Laura. A bit more Zoftic too. Laura was well off in the bosom department, but Nora looked to be built a bit more. She dressed down to de-emphasize that. I had thought about how and where to approach her. I couldn't think of any way to accidentally run into her that wouldn't make me look like a jerk. And if I waited for her out by her car, I would look like a stalker. I didn't want to spook her, so I decided to go see her on her own turf, up in her office surrounded by the people she managed. I walked into her cubicle, then stood there, tongue-tied. I had forgotten how frightened I was likely to be when with a woman. Those new fears rose up in me, and I couldn't think of a damned thing to say to break the ice. I had thought of some stuff, even practiced a little speech, but it all dribbled right out of my ears when I needed it. Normally, when I was turning in my paperwork, I give it to a nice older lady named Marge Hepner. So, Nora didn't have any reason to be expecting to see me at her desk, but she gave me a welcoming smile, anyway. "Hello, Vince," she said. "What a pleasant surprise. We don't often see you and hear past Margie's desk." She looked more carefully at me, almost like she knew that I had something on my mind. "Vince, what's up?" Well, Nora, Actually, I was wondering if you, would you think about having lunch with me? What would you think about having lunch with me? It's okay if you don't want to, but, see, I have this question, and I need a woman's advice. And I thought of you. Being as how you're a woman and, instead of dismissing me as a gibbering idiot, she smiled. "I'm okay. You have a question and you need a woman's advice. And you thought of me, being as how I'm a woman and all. I'm flattered, Vince. I didn't think you'd noticed. And you're willing to buy me lunch to get my answer. Well, that sounds intriguing. To tell the truth, you taking me out to lunch will certainly stir my girls up. Gossip, you know? Now why the hell would that be? I wondered. So yes. When did you want to go out and where? I only have an hour for lunch. Me too. What about now? And how about Benny's? I asked. Then I suddenly realized I had screwed up. Oh geez. I know it's short notice, I said, and I guess a guy's not supposed to ask a girl out on short notice, but, Vince, that's when you're asking for a date. A romantic date. So, are you saying this lunch is a romantic date? I know I turned brick red. I could feel my own face go on fire. Oh geez. No. I wouldn't dare. Why would you? She took pity on me, and you can forget what I said about not wanting pity. Believe me, I needed it right then. I can't ever remember being such a bumbling dolt. But, see, I hadn't been dating in over 22 years. That's a damned long time. I had forgotten how to talk to a woman. Not when it's about something important and personal. Tell you what, she said. Give me 5 minutes to freshen up. Wait right here. Do not move, she said, and took her purse toward the ladies' room at the end of the bay. Well, I sure as hell wasn't going to move. I watched her, thinking of how nice she looked from the rear. Like I said before, I had noticed, but I hadn't noticed, if you get my meaning. I tried hard not to look at women too much or too hard when I was a faithful husband. Even a boring, lazy, selfish, ugly, disgusting, fat, slob of a needle-willied faithful husband. Funny how that seems to keep coming up, huh? And up to now, since the letter, I had been wary of women, for all those reasons I said before. So I watched Nora as she walked into the ladies' room with very mixed emotions. And then I turned around. There were maybe 20 or so women who worked under Nora, all involved in billing and data entry and other administrative tasks. When I wrote up my daily reports and turned in my logs and my signed work orders to Marge, these were the people who entered it all into the databases. I barely knew them by sight and fewer than half of them by name, but I just then realized that they all knew me, certainly by name. I wondered how much more they knew about me. Did they know I was a boring, lazy, selfish, ugly, disgusting, fat needle-willied slob? I thought all this in a flash, because I realized that almost every single one of those women had stopped what they were doing and were staring at me. The few who weren't were whispering to each other and then joined in the group activity. They weren't hostile stares, nor pitying ones, thank God. It was just straight-out curiosity like, what is he? No. What are you doing here? I did not know how to react, so I just stood there. My tool belt and hat were in my truck, and I was wearing the standard work uniform with the telco name and my name on the shirt. I suddenly got very conscious of my gut. I was thinking of it hanging over my belt. I was thinking of being fat. I mean, there are some guys who just hang over their belts so much you can't even see they have a belt. Did I look like that? I'm a fat slob, remember? Hell, I hadn't even gotten down to fat slob on the list. Although, like I said, I've been working on it. With that bike time in the Bowflex, I had pulled in my belts a full notch. As I looked more carefully, I realized that the closest women were staring, and at first I thought it was at my gut. But I looked closer, and they were looking lower down. And that embarrassed me, and without my wanting it, began to excite me. Under normal circumstances, that would have been good news. It had been a while, like maybe 1,000 years starting 10 seconds after I reread that letter. "How's it feel being the center of attention?" said a sweet voice in my ear. I swear I jumped. It was Nora, wearing a mischievous grin. She had come back from the ladies while I was sort of preoccupied. She got a folded piece of paper from a drawer, stuck it in her purse, and grabbed my arm. "Come on, Vince. Feeding time. Now let's look at Nora's inputs. I want to tell you about those things from my perspective, and really, from the general women's perspective, including some things about Vince and what we thought of him. I know this. When he came home that Monday night after work and found that Laura had left him, Vince had no idea that he was already a minor telco celebrity. You read earlier about how he approached his work, compared to most of the other technicians, about them cheating on the clock and all that, stealing paid time to go off to work PT jobs and bone the housewives and all that. Well, he wasn't the only one who knew about that. Like he said, my section gets all the logs and work records and puts them in the company database. When my boss got moved up to director of maintenance and I got promoted, I managed to pull in some favors and got Telco to spring for a new database system. The old one was put in under my old boss, Tony Franco. Well, Tony was a perfect example of the Peter principle. You know, where you get promoted until you reach a level where you're incompetent. Tony went from being an average tech to head of my section, about which he was pretty clueless. That's the job I have now. The smartest thing he did there was stay out of my way, because I ran it for him. The second smartest thing he did was keeping up the butt kissing. That led him to go Mr. Peter one better and get promoted one level above where he was already incompetent. Someone should write a book about that. We print out status records every week and every month. Guess who did the most jobs of any technician over just about any time period you want to sort? Generally, Vince. Guess who averaged the most jobs completed per day? Generally, Vince. As a matter of record, using any positive thing you choose, Vince usually lead the list or be number 2. Fewest callbacks, fewest customer complaints, highest customer satisfaction survey score. It was usually Vince. There were 2 guys who were sometimes up there at Vince's level once in a while. One was Terry Spears, and the other was Rick Cooper. But Terry didn't really count. He was Tony Franco's son-in-law and a big-time brown-noser. So Tony gave him all the easy jobs and some special assignments that padded his numbers. We knew all about him. And Rick was a pretty good tech, but he was one of them who'd go on a trouble call, see that it was a cabling problem, and then tell the customer that the cables and the phone were bad. So he'd replace the phone, fix the cables, and then go to the club and sell the phone to the dealer. And he didn't even have to fix it first, because there was nothing wrong with it. So he was a pretty decent tech, but a thief. I'll tell you how we knew that in a sec. I have 23 employees, all women, and every single one of them knew that Vince Moretti, by any reasonable standard, was the best tech that Telco had. And that was before Laura left him, when he already told you he really wasn't working as hard as he could. But we knew a lot more than the mere numbers about the techs. There was the detective work, the information gathering, the plain old nosiness. Most guys are dumb. They talk. They boast. They like to brag about what they are getting away with. They brag to their buddies and their girlfriends, and their buddies spill to their girlfriends. Lots of gossip and secrets get spilled during pillow talk. So, we knew who were working part-time on stolen company time. We knew who were screwing the lonely ladies on their routes, or the neighbor lady next door. We even knew which techs were running the reworked parts scam that Vince told you about. Like I said, guys like to brag to their girlfriends. And my girls are friends with their girlfriends. That's how we knew about Rick. He was stealing from Telco and bragging about it to his drinking buddies. And Vince was never one of those baddies. An absolutely straight arrow. So here was what the girls and I knew about Vince Moretti. He was the hardest worker. He was the best worker. He didn't cheat the company. He didn't goof off. He didn't cheat on his wife. He didn't profiteer off company property. Compared with most of the guys, Vince was a damned near-perfect worker. Plus, the people who knew him well said he was a real sweet man. And now his wife had screwed him over. For a big willy loser. What a maroon. So, that's what I wanted to tell you. That's what I knew about Vince when he walked into my office and asked me to have lunch and give him my opinion on something. And I'll tell you this. Before he ever came to see me, I had made up my mind that I wanted to get to know this Vince Moretti better. If for no reason except that I had the letter, and it just didn't square with the man in those reports and the nice decent man we saw around and heard about. I wanted to somehow meet him and form my own opinion. Now, back to Vince's story. We were at a back booth at Benny's and had just finished our meal. I had a Caesar salad with chicken, hold the croutons, fat slob husband, remember? And she had surrounded and eaten a big fat veal parmesan sub with fries, onion rings, and an iced tea. I guess she didn't think she had to watch her figure, like the women sometimes say. And she didn't. I was watching it for her on the sly. I was relieved to see she didn't reach for a cigarette after eating. I quit smoking back when I was in the Navy, and it was always a sticking point between me and Laura. She never even tried to quit. I made my feelings on that crystal clear, but she just snapped back, telling me to mind my own business. Laura liked to present herself as refined, but when it came down to it, she could throw around every word in the book just as well as anyone. Now Nora sat sipping her iced tea. Okay, thanks for lunch, Vince. Time to pay the piper. I had been sort of absent-mindedly staring at her melons and looked up startled. What? I was embarrassed at being caught. She laughed at having caught me. I thought that women hated guys to stare at their melons, but she just laughed. You said you had a question that you need answered by a woman, she said. Oh yes. I still hadn't quite figured out how to phrase it. Yes, I said. It's about me. I've been told but I couldn't say it. It suddenly sounded so much like a kid in school, trying to ask someone something about himself. Does Leah like me? Does Nancy? Does she think I am too skinny? Too fat? Too ugly? Here I was with this adult woman who probably never had an insecure moment in her life, as pretty and self-assured as she was. I felt like a fool, thinking of asking her a stupid question like that. But that was what I was here for. I tried to begin again. Nora, from a woman's point of view, I'm asking you to be honest. About me. Am I? Do I look? But I couldn't say it. I just couldn't ask her. I'm sorry, I said. This is a mistake. I shouldn't have. I started to slide out of the booth. Nora put her hand on my arm and gripped hard. I stopped. Then she reached into her purse and brought out a folded sheet of paper. Vince, don't leave, she said. Please. I think I know what you wanted to ask. Or at least I have a clue. And I really do want to answer you. Tell you what I think. I know how hurt you have been by what's happened to you. And how embarrassed you must be to see people every day who know everything. That stopped me. Everything? What did that mean? How could Nora possibly know everything? Was she a mind reader? I was going to say it in my mind as mind reader, but somehow I couldn't. Not with her. Nora slid halfway around the booth, until her warm, firm thigh was against mine. That felt nice. She was holding my gaze as she moved, and I was gripped by something in her eyes, something she was trying to signal to me. Vince, I want to read you something. She unfolded the piece of paper. I just looked at her, into her beautiful eyes. I was screwed if I knew what color they were, but I knew they were beautiful. I looked at her, widening my gaze. Her eyelids, her eyebrows, her cheeks, her nose, her generous mouth. They were pretty features. She was a pretty woman, but her eyes were beautiful. She began to read. Vince. Oh God, it was the letter. Please, just let lightning strike me down right now. Not her. No, she can't know what Laura wrote about me. Yes, it was. She did. She read it all the way through in a quiet, neutral voice. I wanted to shrink down to nothing. I was stunned and ashamed and angry. How did you get that? I managed to choke out. I was getting close to crying again. Laura emailed a copy to all of her scaggy friends, she said. They talked about it. Every woman who heard about it wanted to read it and told her friends, and they wanted to read it. It was forwarded all over town. I was breathing hard and quick and fast. My life was just about over. All over town? Everyone has read this? She nodded. Everyone I know. I put my face down on the table. If it wasn't that I was in a very public place with a pretty woman, I would have cried. I couldn't look at her. Jesus, I thought. Now I know why all the funny looks. They knew. The guys. The girls. I could barely hold my head up before I knew everyone knew. Now, I was scrunching my body up. How can I get out of here? I just wanted to go home and go to bed, pull the covers over my head and never come out. I felt Nora's hand on my neck and shoulders, rubbing and kneading. At any other time and in any other circumstance, it would have been soothing, but I could not be soothed. I started to move again, to slide out of the booth. Nora clamped her hand down on my neck. The woman had a damned strong grip. No, you will not, Vince Moretti, she whispered fiercely. Will not what? How did she know what I wanted to do? I guess the idea that she could read my mind hardly surprised me. Shit, I might as well just babble what I was thinking about out to the world. I had no secrets anymore. Nora talked very low but very clearly. You are not going home and hide. This is what you are going to do. You are going to pay the bill with a nice tip and take me back to the office. Then you'll go to your afternoon's work like the good conscientious man that you are, and then you will go home. You will shave and take a shower. She was writing something on her business card. Then you will put on nice casual clothes, and you will come to this address. But not before 7, mind you. Are you paying attention? I looked into those lovely, deadly serious eyes and nodded. Okay. Are you allergic to chicken or green beans or onions or tomatoes? I said no. Do you dislike chicken or green beans or onions or tomatoes? I shook my head. She was bossing me around, and I didn't mind it a bit. I was looking into those eyes. What color were they? Okay. Bring a bottle or 2 of wine. No, definitely make it 2. We have a lot to talk about. Have you ever had chicken curry? I shook my head no. Well, you are going to have it tonight. I only have 3 really good recipes and chicken curry is my best. And it is very healthy and low carb too. It was about 5 minutes after 7, and I was knocking on her door. Following orders. Not before 7. I had a shopping bag with 3 bottles of chilled white Zinfandel. I didn't know much about wine, but I knew that chicken took white wine. But I was worried, because it didn't look like white wine. More like red. But the label said it was white Zinfandel. The bag also contained 1 loaf of French bread and another of garlic French bread, covering all bases. She opened up looking like, well, I'll get to that in a minute. She looked in the bag and clucked and oohed over its contents. Then she grabbed my arm and pulled me inside. Now, I'm not a small guy, even when I wasn't a fat slob, but this woman had some serious muscles packaged inside that dress. Which was, again, I'll get to the dress later. Vince, you are a genius, she said. Or a mind reader. 3 bottles is definitely what we need. Now, hanging around with a bunch of guys makes you kind of coarse in the way you talk. And it's hard to remember sometimes that some people dislike that. Like most women. Apparently, that didn't include Nora. I could be myself around her. Good. I needed all the help I can get. I didn't even know why I was there. What did Nora want? And that dress? She put the wine in the fridge except for 1 bottle that she asked me to open. It wasn't a screw-top bottle, which apparently affected the price by about $5 per bottle. But I hadn't stinted a bit. I was kind of playing this whole Nora thing by ear. I found a corkscrew lever kind of thing and opened bottle number 1. Again, I knew very little about wine, and so I was a little worried to find that Zinfandel white poured out looking mighty damned red, just like it had looked in the store. But I thought back then that it might have been from the red bottle. I thought I had screwed up again. But Nora acted as if everything was okay. I asked, are we supposed to let it breath or something? She snorted and said it had better grab a damned quick big gulp of air because she intended to down it pretty quick. I poured out 2 generous glasses and she went to clink hers against mine, saying, Vince, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And she did knock down a big swallow, as did I. A beautiful friendship? That sounded good. It also sounded familiar. Casablanca, I yelled. Rick to Captain Renault. Nora grinned. Damn, she liked old movies. She slathered garlic butter on the second loaf, toasted them both, and then we sat down to chicken Afghan kidney bean curry, which was fantastic. We had it with the garlic bread, and let me tell you, the garlic in the bread went head-to-head with the onions and tomatoes in the chicken Afghan kidney bean curry. It was a perfect match. We finished both loaves and a big serving of chicken Afghan kidney bean curry. I knew I'd have to go extra hard on that bike tomorrow, no matter what she said about it being healthy and carb-free. By the end of the meal, we were also getting close to the bottom of bottle number 1. And these were not small bottles. Let's save dessert for later, she said. I'm too full right now. She asked me to break out the next bottle, and she excused herself. I watched her go up the stairs. I went to the downstairs powder room myself, and I thought about that dress. Okay, let me tell you about that sundress. Good thing I peed quick, because thinking about the dress started to give me a major hard-on, which I was delighted to see. The second signs of life in one day. I had been sporting a mini since she first opened the door, but now it was escalating. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the dress. It was bright yellow and pretty and looked good against her red hair. It was the parts of it that were missing that were the problem. There were holes in it. They had hemmed edges and were evenly placed along both sides, so they were there on purpose. But they were damned strategically placed. There was one on each side at her rib cage, which was very nice and trim and pretty to look at, but where they were also giving me a very unsettling view of the bottom slope of her mangoes, which were large and apparently capable of defying gravity. Well, some, anyway. But there was no bra, unless it was of those new invisible radar-evading stealth bras. There were other holes at her hips that peeked around the back and showed me a magnificent view of her lower back and the rounded tops of her butt cheeks. Did I mention that the dress was also slit up the side from someplace around her knees to someplace way up on her thigh? I guess I wasn't seeing anything that I wouldn't have seen on a beach if Nora was wearing a bikini. But when it was all revealed in the supposedly concealing confines of a dress, oh my. She came down and pretended like she was totally unaware of my condition, which I totally doubted. I swear she had this little smirkish smile as we settled on a couch in a living roomy kind of portion of her open layout ground floor. She had the folded paper in her hands. That paper. I began to lose my boner. Vince, you asked me if the whole world had read it, and I said pretty much. And you said you wanted to go run and hide. Well, you didn't say it, but I could feel on the back of your neck and in your shoulders. Now I kind of agree with you. I can imagine how tough it's gonna be, dealing with the men you see every day, and knowing now that they've read this. Not to mention us mean women. She said that last with a smile. Forgive me. I'm going to read it to you again, and then I'm going to tell you this woman's opinion. Somehow, I think that was what you meant about wanting my opinion on something. It was that list. Am I right? I nodded. She was a mind reader. Are you okay with that? She said. Do you trust me? I looked into her beautiful, kind, warm eyes, and I nodded. Yeah, go ahead, Vince. I'm sure you spotted that there's no deer up there. That's because there is nothing dear about you. You are a boring, lazy, selfish, ugly, disgusting, fat slob. I haven't made love with you in years. I've just endured sex. I could barely stand having sex with you, and you were too dense to know the difference. I have been making wonderful, mind-blowing love with a gorgeous, beautiful, caring man for over a year now. His great big meat has been giving me pleasure that I could only dream about when I'm with you and your pathetic little needle Willie. I let you screw me whenever you wanted because it hardly bothered me, except to have to fake once in a while. I was ready to leave you months ago, but he wanted to wait until the right time. And that time is now. He called me Sunday and told me to get packed and ready. We are going far away to start a wonderful new life together. I won't even bother with divorce and all that because I don't care. I am secure in his love and in his arms. I guess you can divorce me if you want, although it hardly seems worthwhile for you. Who the hell would ever want to marry you, the way you are? Well, Vince, I just came back to finish this, and I read this over again, and I have to say that I was a little harsh, maybe a little too harsh. You are a pretty decent man in some ways, and you worked hard to be a good provider. Maybe you can find some lonely older woman who'll be willing to settle for what you are. But I can't. Laura. Now, Vince, let me tell you a few things, Nora began. I read that, and I've talked to most of the girls who've read it. And that was a lot of the girls who work at Telco. And you know what we thought? We looked at you. There you were, in and out of the offices sometimes, and picking up parts and stuff at the plant. We looked at you and thought about the letter. Not just what it said about you, but more importantly, about what it told us about Laura. I don't think. No, I know, that there is not a single woman in the place who could ever have written a mean-spirited, nasty, insulting, emasculating letter like that to a man like you. And we have our share of man-hating women, and we really didn't know you that well. Not personally, like I'm trying to get to do tonight. But we've seen you and seen the decent man that you are and how you act with people. Vince, you are one of the nicest men going. Nora had been sitting, then standing, then even walking around a little as she talked. Now she sat down again next to me. And you and I start from there, Vince. She said, you've seen all those women who work for me. 23 women who range from a few kids right out of high school to women my age and older. The older ones are mostly divorced, largely because of their men cheating. They get all of you guys' paperwork, and after dealing with it for a few years, they know what it means, better than you guys do. They probably know more about how long it takes to do every kind of trouble call than your boss does. They can see that Vince consistently takes 35 to 40 minutes to do a certain thing, and they see guys who claim an hour and a half for the same thing. So they know the other guy is padding it and goofing off on the clock. We've heard rumors about the guys doing the fixing and reselling of parts, too. Hell, there are men who brag about it to their girlfriends. And there are guys who brag to their buddies about all the lonely housewife sex they get on telco time. And those buddies tell their girlfriends about that, too. We all pretty much came to know who the thieves and cheats are. But we can't do anything because it's not proof. It's circumstantial evidence, like they say on the crime and court TV shows. But we know them for what they are. The gorgeous guy in shipping who beats his wife and cheats on her. The guys who go off to the brothels. The guys who screw the housewives without a condom. They brag to their buds about it. What kinds of nasty stuff might they be bringing home to put into their unsuspecting wives? Do you understand what I'm telling you, Vince? I had been listening in amazement. It all made sense, but who would have thought these women were so clued in? But it seemed obvious now. And that brings me back to you, and to what Laura wrote, Nora said with a smile. Yes, you certainly do seem like a pretty decent man, and you do work hard at your 2 jobs. Yes, we know about that. Laura used to talk about that to her skaggy friends, and they would gossip it around. Never underestimate the detective powers of a bunch of motivated, basically bored women. Vince, you did everything to keep her in clothes and cosmetics and special food and drink and all those other things that she demanded. And you did your best to get them for her, because you loved her. And she was a high-maintenance, spoiled woman who took and kept shutting you out of her life, and then went out and cheated on you. We knew it was with Glenn. She wasn't very careful, and she talked about it to her loose-mouthed friends. We know all about him, too. Glenn, the big baby with the big willy who never grew up. A guy who'd screw anything that moves as long as he feels like it, married or not. Whether him or them, it didn't matter. And that's Laura's dreamboat? The guy she's broken up with 3 times because he screwed around on her? I'll tell you this, Vince. Any woman with a lick of sense want to go off with a loser like him because he is another inch or 2. No woman with any sense who knows his history. Sure, size is nice, all else considering. But most of us know that size is only part of it, and a very small part of it, to make a joke. So, Vince, here we women were, looking at you, and thinking about that nasty laundry list of things she threw at you, which just didn't match up with the Vince we knew, even though we didn't know you personally. I had tensed up, and even in the middle of her venting, she sensed it. She suddenly sat back and leaned against me, and her hand touched my cheek and turned my face back to her, and to her eyes. Oh, Vince, honey, that's what this was all about, wasn't it? That list. That nasty list. Well, before I get to that and your question, let me ask you a question. Before she took up with Glenn, before anything, did Laura ever talk to you about those things? Did she ever complain about the things on that list? I couldn't answer. I couldn't think. I wasn't ready for this. So much of this being dumped on me tonight. I couldn't begin to find words. Nora squeezed my arm. Vince, back when I was married, if I ever thought that my husband, bless his cheating little heart, was getting boring, you can bet your life I would have a serious discussion about it with him. Like, he should get off his dead, and we should go find something to do together. I'd have gone to his baseball games if he'd have gone to my literary club. Things like that. Let's try something new in the bedroom. Let's get a sex manual and work our way through it. That's how you stop being boring. Did you and Laura ever have talks like that? That I could answer. No, I swear. She was always telling me I should open up and communicate and all that, but she never said anything like that. That I was boring, or lazy, or anything like what she wrote. Hell, I'd fallen into a cozy routine. I admit that. I spent way too much time with my friends away from the house and her. I had Glenn as my role model, the bad boy who played and played. I look at that list and I say mostly guilty. But look, she wasn't any ball of fire herself. She was boring too, and she excluded me from the things she liked to do. Over the years, I tried to get her interested in things like maybe taking a class together, dancing or something. I mentioned sculpture, or drawing, or joining a hiking club, or some outdoor things like that. But she was never interested. She liked to do her own things by herself, and go out with her friends for all those nights out. And after a while, I got tired of asking. I was starting to get pretty hot thinking about it. I was boring? Me? Well, hell, Seichi had been boring. Nora had poured me another glass of the wine, and I had drained it as we talked. She poured us another. White, red or purple, that Zinfandel sure went down easily. I returned to the list. Was I lazy? Well, I was certainly no dynamo at home. If I wasn't working my jobs, or out with the guys, I guess I would just sit around like a slug. I'd do my chores, and I'd help her with the vacuuming and dishes and stuff, but only when she asked me to get off my lazy butt and help out more. And I did help out when Jenna was born. Vince, what did Laura do all day? Nora asked. Did she have a job? Well, I thought so, I said. In the last year or so, she said that she had a job answering phones at some temp agency. It was 4 days a week in the mornings. So I thought she was working. One of the little things I just learned was that she quit that job and was probably spending that time screwing Glenn. I think he had a job where he could work odd hours. So no, she wasn't working any job. So she worked 3 or 4 hours a day, 4 days a week pumping Glenn? Nora said. But that wore her out. So she wanted you to help her with the household chores? Nora asked. Vince, believe me, I think married people should share the household chores, but in an equitable way. How many hours a day were you working? She poured us another glass each. Then she went and got the other bottle. Was that bottle number 2 or or number 3? I tried to get back to her question. I was very dry, and the wine was very cool and welcome. Geez, I think I was getting a little buzz. Oh yes, the hours. Well, I don't work the extra no more. Now that she's gone, all of a sudden I find I can pay my bills fine without it. I mean, I had a rough spot there when she cleaned out all of our money, so I worked extra until I got caught up on the mortgage and utilities. Before that, it was amazing how much of our money went for things she needed. Anyway, I don't need the extra money anymore, so I dropped the other job. But before that, when I was doing them both, I put in the 8 hours plus lunch at Telco, and maybe 2 hours each evening at the shop before going out with the guys. And then I worked 4 hours at the shop Saturday mornings. We repaired small appliances. That was in an area of town where people couldn't always afford to go buy a new appliance when an older one broke down. Nora pursed her mouth. So she was working 0 hours a week and screwing Glenn behind your back, and you were working 54 hours a week. And yet she called you lazy because you didn't volunteer to do more housework? What a princess. I had to grin back. Well, I suppose you can call me a boob. It does sound pretty shitty of her when you put it like that. But I was always like you. I thought couples should share the housework, just like the childcare. Vince, each partner should help out. That's just being fair. But doing equal shares of work is for when both people work full-time jobs. But you said childcare, didn't you? I've never been lucky enough to have a child. I'll go out on a limb and guess you were a pretty involved daddy, weren't you? Oh yeah, I laughed. I took care of Jenna as much as Laura did. Did the baths, the diapers, the feeding, the burping, the taking to the park and stuff. I'll tell you the truth, despite the normal yucky stuff, the dirty stinky diapers and getting a face full of baby pee when you take off the diaper, etc. I loved it. I think it made me always felt real close to Jenna. Nora got an odd wistful expression on her face when I was talking about taking care of Jenna. Vince, what I started out to do was to show you that that list was largely bullshit. And now I know it for certain. She was sitting next to me now, like at the restaurant. She had that warm, firm thigh pressed against mine again. I took another drink of the wine. The 7 deadly husband sins. I mused. What? I looked at her. She had those beautiful eyes on me. That's what I called them, I said. She picked up the paper and read it again. Well, here is my opinion, Vince, the one you wanted to get. My opinion is that based on the first 3 items on this list, you get a serious instant pass on the next 3. Ugly, disgusting, fat slob, etc. They are all bullshit. Vince, you won't win many beauty prizes, but you aren't a bad-looking guy at all. No, screw that. You're better looking than that. I've been looking at you all evening, and I certainly like what I'm seeing. Ugly. Laura must have been looking in a mirror at her own ugly soul when she wrote that. Let me tell you something, Vince. Me and the girls could name 10 guys at work who might be better looking than you. Maybe 20. But me and the girls know so much about those handsome princes that we wouldn't take any of them if he was handed over on a platter. But you? I can think of at least 30 women who would give almost anything to be here close beside you right now instead of me. And you're already half drunk, to boot. So we give you a pass, unseen and undefended on all but one of the list. They are mere blips. They are very fixable with a little encouragement. Like, take the fat slob thing. Hell, you are not so fat and by no means would anyone who ever spent time with you call you a slob. You could stand to lose that little spare tire and the love handles, but that's not hard. I just have to help you work on that. She does? I thought. Nora got a strange look to her. She turned and seemed to stare at me, only into me, as if searching for something. As if she was trying to make up her mind about something. It didn't make me uncomfortable or anything like that. I knew by now that she was a nice person and wouldn't be setting me up for anything bad. I didn't know how I knew that, but I knew it all the same. In fact, now that I have you here, and we've had this little talk and all of that great wine, I've come to a decision. I am going to help you work on that weight thing, starting right now. Vince, look me in the eyes. That was easy. I wanted to do that, like I'd been trying to do all evening. Her beautiful eyes. Okay, Vince. Vince? A little focus here? Okay, here it is. Nora took a deep breath and a gulp of her wine. Vince, I have a proposition for you. Now, I gotta say right now I can't believe I'm gonna say this myself. Oh wow. Vince, if I promise to screw you whenever we can get together, almost no holds barred. If I promise that, do you promise that you will lose 10 pounds for me? What? I looked at her, stunned, at all of her. I had almost forgotten about how sexy and all she was in that dress, in the weird intensity of our discussion. Wait a minute. What did she just say? She was promising what? To screw me? To screw me? If I promise to do what? I'm serious, Nora said. Your reward for dropping 10 pounds in, say, 2 months is me on an indefinite basis. If you're interested. If you want me. You see, that's my subtle way of checking you out on that tail ender on your list. Vince, I'm going to find out, for the sake of the sisterhood, if you really are a needle willy. I had been raising a rapid major hard-on, until that last. She had been watching my fly fronts rise and fall. Oh no you don't, she laughed. She stood up and smiled and said, Vince, you are going to be so easy. You've been so lost in my eyes, which I love about you by the way, that you've forgotten my other weapons. And with that she pulled the dress up and off her body. If she was wearing panties they must be Klingon panties, because they were invisible. Nora looked like a painting I once saw. I was on a high school field trip to an art museum, and I saw this one painting, one of those real old ones from centuries ago. There were these 3 hefty beautiful babes bathing in a woodland pool or something. Now some of the kids in the tour snickered at them, mainly because they were mostly nude except for some little wisps of a scarf, or something that covered them down below. And I guess to guys who lusted after skinny cheerleaders with big boobs, it looked like there was too much woman in each of those figures. It might have seemed like too much, but the sign said it was supposed to be the ideal of female beauty at that time. I guess that was before Leah Jones. All I remembered was that they looked so beautiful and sexy to me then. Well, Nora was like my memory of that brought to life in very real pink and tan living flesh. God, did I say flesh? That there was. That she was. All she was wearing was a big knowing smile. I said a while back that she had a generous mouth, and she did. But her whole body was generous. I could hardly decide where to look. I'm not at all clear how it went after that. Then I remember we sipped some more of that damned fine wine. Then she took me by the hand and led me up the stairs. Did I mention that she had a great figure? We spent a very fine weekend making love, to say the least. Needle willy or not, Nora showed me in every way possible how she enjoyed my efforts to screw her until the eyeballs popped out of her head. She did me, I did her, and we did us. It wasn't perfect. We were beginners at being a couple, still just starting to get used to moving together and fitting each other. I fell out of her bed twice trying to get fancy, and she laughed at me for it. We took a lunch break Saturday, and she got very serious, almost nervous, even. Vince, I am not a 304. I swear to God I've never done anything like this, bringing a guy home and practically throwing myself at him like I just did with you. I did bring you home to have a nice dinner and get a lot of talking out of the way, and I did want to get you all hot and after me. I liked you a lot, and it had been a long time for me, and I was half thinking of seducing you, just to check out, well, you know. But when you lost it in Benny's, I couldn't resist rubbing your neck and shoulders. And something happened to me. You were such a nice guy, and you were in such pain. And as I tried to soothe away some of the hurt, I began to get some feelings that I hadn't had in a very long time. Feelings for a man. Feelings for you. I fully intended to seduce you into my bed, but I didn't anticipate the rest of it. All of this sex and loving and mutual passion, well, that's been as much a surprise to me as it was to you. And I know it was a surprise to you because you didn't even bring any condoms with you. I'm protected, but if you had come here looking to get lucky, I know a guy like you would have come prepared. I told her I didn't know what to expect. Maybe a dumb pep talks to hang in there and tell me that I ain't so ugly that I walk around stopping clocks. So what about it? I asked with a smile. For the record, am I ugly or not? Nora laughed as she took my hand and started heading back upstairs. Yes, Vince, you are ugly. You are so ugly that I just keep staring at your face and never get tired of it. No question you are ugly. Why, I can hardly stand to look at you while I kiss you. Haven't you noticed how I always close my eyes when we kiss? Here, let me show you. When we came up for air, Nora said, and you were boring. Lazy? I said with a grin. Yes. How could I forget lazy? Why, you've spent practically all of the weekend so far in my bed. She enjoyed her little joke, but then she got a little bit more serious. Oh, Vince, I'm such a greedy little pig. Those feeling I said I began to get back at Benny's? Well, they're full-grown now. Now that I've got you, I want to keep you all for myself. If I say that the letter was right, maybe some of those other women who were interested in you would lose interest, and they wouldn't be trying to tempt you. I don't want anyone to tempt you but me. She got a little bit misty-eyed. Vince, do you understand what I'm saying? Am I scaring you off? We were standing naked in her bedroom, face to face, not 4 inches apart at the nose. God, how wonderfully distracting. Focus, Vince, focus, I told myself. I looked at her, not just the eyes but all over her pretty, earnest, right now kind of scared-looking face. Nora, I plan to keep this going with you as often and as long as we can manage until you get tired of me, because I am never going to get tired of you. Or, at least until I lose those 10 pounds. I was smiling at her, And after I've screwed those 10 pounds off you? She asked. Well, we'll evaluate my spare tire and love handles so we can see how much more you need to screw off me. And after we get there, it'll be time for another discussion. Did I mention that I like my men really gaunt? She teased. Well, I said, I don't want to get down too low. That ain't healthy, either. You know what we'll do then? No. Tell me. Well, then I'll pay to send you to cooking school to learn some more fattening recipes and I'll get fat again, and we'll just keep on the way we did this weekend. I hope. If that's okay with you? She showed me how okay that was. I went home very reluctantly Sunday night and went straight to bed at 9. Believe me, I needed the sleep. As I drove, I marveled over how fast my whole life and outlook and attitude had been changed. From down in the depths, I had been raised to the heights. It was as if Nora had pushed a magical reset button and restored all of my feeling of self-worth. And it wasn't just from the sex. That was a part of it, sure, but the biggest part was from Nora. She just exuded life and warmth and compassion and, well, it sure seemed a lot like love. She had told me it had been almost 4 years since she had a good sexual experience with a partner. That was with her soon-to-be ex, just before she caught him cheating. She had reluctantly tried dating after the divorce, and had even gone to bed with one of her post-divorce suitors. But it was unfulfilling. The guy just wanted to use her. That had been her last try until this past weekend with me. And she said that I had made it magical for her. You can imagine how that made me feel. I spent all of Monday out on service calls, the hairier the better. I told my boss to lay them on me, all the dogs. I usually manage 6 or 7 calls a day. That day I did 8, and like I said, some of them were killers. I actually rewired an old switchboard we had been stalling a customer on for months. I worked almost an hour past quitting time, off the clock, to get it done. Why? Because I knew she'd see the work records, and I thought she'd be impressed. I wanted to show off for Nora. I knew she'd see the records. I wanted her to be proud of me. It was kid stuff, but she made me feel like a kid again. As I was driving home Monday night, I got a cell phone call. Hi, it's me, Nora said. How do you feel? Second thoughts? Regrets? Nora, are you kidding? I was wondering about calling you tonight to see when I could see you again. I know we talked about this, and I'm not supposed to ask so late on a romantic date. So, we don't have to make it a romantic date. I mean, look, we don't have to just jump into bed every time. I'd like to have dinner and maybe, well, whatever you'd like to do. Go to a movie or dancing or something. Vince, do I look like a girl who'd welsh on a deal? You seem to forget we have a deal going. I am yours. I think I got maybe 2 pounds off you so far, and the week is young. I don't care where we eat or what we eat. Afterwards, I intend to screw another pound off you. But I have to be home in my bed, alone, by 10:30. Gotta go to work the next day, just like you. So, whatever you want to do that works out like I just said. I'm your girl. And that goes for every night this week until you can't stand the sight of me. God, I was getting to really, really like this woman. On second thought, she said, let me handle it tonight, Vince. I'll come to your place around 6:30 bearing Chinese. But what I really called about was, I want you to come to the office. When are you going to come up to my office again? I want to show you off to my girls. She did? She wanted to go public? With that letter haunting everyone's opinion of me? I told her Friday again. I drop off my paperwork that day, usually. You damn well better come up and see me then, Vince. Or I will make your life a living heck. Near quitting time would be best, say 4:45. I asked her what she had told the girls. She said she had told them almost nothing. She was driving them nuts and enjoying it. All they knew for sure was that she had had me over for dinner on Friday, and she said we had talked for hours. But she would say nothing beyond that. We had a wonderful, exhausting week. We got together every night, did a lot of goofy date things, and I ate like a pig. But we would up in bed early every night, and I ended up 3 pounds lighter by Friday morning. So I showed up on Friday, but not at 4:45. More like around 4:47. Had to show her who was boss. I'll show her living heck. This time the eyes of the women were on me from the moment I came out of the elevator. Nora was in her cubicle on the phone, and she waved for me to stay put out in the big room. So I stood there staying put with all eyeballs fixed on me. It was uncomfortably like the previous week, and I began to get aroused again. I was wondering if anyone would notice. The direction of their eyes shifted down. When Nora came out, she noticed it as she smiled and walked up to me. She put down a folder and put her arms around me. Then she literally climbed up on me and gave me a kiss as hot as the hottest one I had gotten that past weekend. It was the most erotic thing I had ever experienced in public. I felt like an unexplored continent, and Nora was planting her flag in me. Not that I minded in the least. I had been thinking about her all week. I'd leave her place or drop her off there, and I'd think about her every minute I was awake until I saw her again. I was thinking about doing a little flag planting myself. When we broke apart and she got down, I guess my hard-on was visible from the farthest corner of the room. You could have hung a hat on my fly. Nora looked out over her curious girls with a very happy smile and pointed down to the bulge. Don't believe everything you read on the internet, girls. And oh, by the way, in case you didn't notice, Vince is all mine, right? She asked, looking at me. I was hers? I was. Oh my God, yes, I choked out. All yours, as long as you'll have me. Was it my imagination? Or were there some sounds of disappointment as we left? So, see, I never actually got to even think it all through about how I felt about Nora and what I wanted. Before our lunch date the previous Friday, I had been wallowing in self-pity over my failures as a husband and as a man. I had been as low as I imagine a man could get. Then came Lubia, and the dress and the deal, and I was feeling like the luckiest man alive. And all week long I was stuck on how much I really, etc. liked her. And then she told the world that I was hers, and I just got giddy. I was hers? This wonderful, passionate, beautiful woman wanted me? And then she asked me if I was hers, as if to confirm it, and everything clicked as I said, oh my God, yes. Forever. And I've never regretted it. I didn't really, etc. like her. I loved her. That next Monday, I took the morning off and filed for divorce from Laura. It was a generic no-fault kind of reason, irreconcilable differences. Her letter alone would have been grounds for adultery, but I wasn't in a mood to be mean-spirited. Hell, I was so happy with Nora I was inclined to let Laura off the hook. She didn't contest it. What reason could she have? She had what she wanted, Glenn and his big summer sausage. Nora and I became an item, as they say in the gossip columns. When that news began to percolate through our small-town society, there were many men who got a puzzled look as they looked at Nora, who walked around looking like the most happy, well-screwed female on earth, all of the time. Most men know that look. And then they'd look at me and get an even more puzzled look on their faces. And Nora would grin at them and hug my arm closer and climb into my mouth. Almost. Point made. Screw them. I sent it off to Jenna, who by the calendar was probably on the road heading home by then. Well, Jenna and a carload of her friends rolled in on late Saturday afternoon about a week after she sent her email. She got out of the car waving the printout of my emailed my side of the story and was loaded with questions. Dad, where is she? I've got to meet Nora. Right inside, Jenna, waiting to meet you. I was nail-biting nervous. Nora was staying the weekend with me. That was her idea. She said that she had to meet Jenna sometime and let her know what was up with us. Only it wasn't just Jenna. She brought 3 of her classmates in with her to back her up. Nora was nervous. At first it was Nora against Jenna and her 3 young defenders, sitting out under the awning on my deck. I got orders. Iced tea all around, and make myself scarce. Aye, ma'am. I knew who the boss was at the moment. And at the moment, I think I had 5 of them. All women outrank mere men at certain times. I peeked through the kitchen window. To me, who was basically a clueless man, there wasn't much action. They sized each other up. They talked a little. Nora looked to be getting a little bit misty-eyed. Jenna hugged her, and they cried together. Then, one by one, Jenna's 3 friends came in and leaned against the kitchen counter and stared at me. It was pretty uncomfortable, and I wondered why I was so fascinating. Finally, one of them, Loretta, said, "We read my side of the story. You told Jenna it was all right?" I nodded. "Mr. Moretti, I thought that your wife's letter was the absolute worst letter I ever read. I emailed it to my dad, and he said if he ever got a screw you John letter like you did, there would definitely have been a double murder." I thought, great. She proly sent the whole attachment. So my fame has now gone from local to regional. Then when we read about you dedicating yourself to work and getting yourself into shape and then meeting Nora and all, well, we all cried. It was so nice and noble, so romantic, so beautiful, and so friggin' erotic. One of the other girls said, Tiffany, I think was her name. That evening with the chicken curry and the wine, that was to die for. I just pray that I'll have a night like that sometime. I gotta get that recipe. Mr. Moretti, don't worry about what's going on out there, Loretta said. Nora and Jenna are getting along great. You want to know what she said about you? Nora, I mean, she said that the only guys who had been asking her out were losers and hounds just out to get in her pants. Then you walked up and stammered out an invitation to lunch, and her life has never been the same since. That you were a gift of love when she had thought she was going to be alone for the rest of her life. Jesus, that's so romantic I can hardly stand it. I want to cry. She'd do anything for you. And I guess you'd do the same for her. Loretta, I said, I will do anything for her. and I swear I'll never take her for granted. I've learned that much. Eventually, my two ladies came inside, arm in arm. They had become a mutual admiration society. We put the girls up for the night, and then Jenna stayed while the other three went off to their hometown to see their folks. We had amazing 10 days. Jenna worried that her being in the house might cramp our style. But Nora laughed and said that if she didn't like the sights and sounds, she should put earplugs in and blinders on, because she was planning to screw me until I begged for mercy. As usual, she swears I still have a little bit of flab. Jenna said after that she was careful to stop, look, and listen before she opened any closed doors. On the 10th day, as she was waiting for Loretta and the gang to come pick her up for the return trip, Jenna said that Nora and I should write a sequel to my side of the story to tell them how things worked out and tie up loose ends. We said we'd think about it. There's an old joke that goes, "My wife ran off with my best friend, and I sure miss him." Rimshot. Bada bing. Well, it was almost true, for a little while. I had been taking Laura for granted too much. Of course, she had long ago withdrawn her commitments to honor me, and I did almost spend more time in Glenn's company than with my wife. And we did seem to have that male bonding thing going, at least from my side. And at one time I thought he was a fun guy to hang around with, if he wanted to be a kid again. Really, Glenn was still like a great big kid who'd never bothered to grow up, always willing to try some crazy thing or other. If we were still 15-year-olds, he would have still been my best buddy. But what the hell was I doing hanging around with him at 45? After Laura left and I picked up the pieces and met Nora, it grew on me how selfish a person he was. Well, that was sort of just like me back then, and sometime all of my male buddies were selfish and neglectful. But Glenn was even more so. He'd been married twice and neither had lasted long. I guess he was a selfish, my way or the highway man as a lover and husband too. He was handsome, and he had a big tool, and so I guess they hung around long enough for that to wear off his allure. And then they kicked him out. He was supposed to be my friend, my best friend. Friends don't screw their friends' wives. And keep on doing it while palling around and pretending to be a best buddy. And while other people began to figure it out. Oh, and it was going on a lot longer than 1 year. But he did that. Then something happened and he and Laura decided they wanted to be exclusive. Nora figured that part out. Why all of a sudden, they had to run away. See, I was sometimes envious of his being so wild and free and all. But he was insanely jealous of me, what I had. That's why he went after Laura. He wanted what was mine. He could never be the worker I was, or be respected like I was. So he went after my wife to undermine that respect and bring me down. People realized there was something going on, and that made me the clueless cuck, and he thought that would bring me down in some people's eyes. So he was using Laura, although the affair, for another purpose beside the sex. She was a tool to belittle me. Oh, she was a good and all that, and he'd always been hot for her. But he was using her to get at me. When he came onto her, she dropped that job, and they got going behind my back. That was where she spent her 4 hours a day, Tuesday through Friday, screwing Glenn. He forced her to make the big break because his campaign to belittle me wasn't working all that well. He had to run off with her to rub my nose in it. Well, that worked, for a while. That was when I was taken down so low, and everyone had read that letter, and what it said was their picture of me. Laura was a fool from beginning to end. I have to think that sneaking around to meet him and his handsome face and his jokes and his nice big meat was a lot more fun when it was on the sneak when she was supposed to be answering phones than when they were gone off openly, spending all their time together in his shitty trailer. Day-to-day with Glenn doesn't seem to be that much fun over the long haul. Oh, and that riding off into the sunset lasted all of 83 miles. Then the trailer broke an axle and some other things gave out, and they realized that they were permanently located in another small town a couple hours drive from me. He wasn't boring, or ugly, or disgusting, and a fat slob, and he certainly wasn't small, but maybe that wasn't enough. He sure as hell was lazy and selfish. Too bad Laura took the long way around to finding out. And this wasn't the first time around for her with him. Look back at their history together. What in the hell made her think he'd ever change? And it was like I said to Nora. She had never talked to me about the things that she said bothered her. She had never complained and given me a chance to improve and become a better man and husband in her eyes. It was like she thought I was so selfish that I wouldn't do it. Nora thinks that Laura didn't really want me to become the new improved Vince because she might find herself suffering by comparison. That's why she never wanted to find things that we could do together, either. I was willing to give her book club meets a try. Like I said, I read Shakespeare in high school. I would have been game for book discussions and things like that. I offered, but she shot me down. Maybe she was afraid that I might have an original thought or comment to make to her friends. Per Nora, Laura's sneaking around and getting drilled by Glenn was a pleasant way of avoiding her own shortcomings. Well, my soon-to-be former wife Laura called me one day speaking of the devil, and asked if she could meet with me. This was maybe a month after Nora and I got together, and the public notice of my filing for divorce had been placed in the regional papers. At that time, I didn't have any idea where they had wound up. Not knowing that, I couldn't have her served with the divorce papers. I had her email ID, but the lawyer said they couldn't confirm whether she'd actually gotten the paperwork as an enclosure if we couldn't tell whether she'd ever read the email. So she wanted to meet me. I asked Nora if she minded, and she just laughed. "Well, it's been nice knowing you, Vince," she said. "I'll just sit home and worry myself sick about her taking you away from me." I met Laura at a Denny's. She was very quiet, very apologetic, very humble. She told me how far her great adventure with Glenn got. 83 miles to where his trailer broke down. It was irreparable, and so there they were gonna stay. He got a job at a place where he could park the trailer out back, and they set up housekeeping. They needed an oversized Jordan wrecker to pick it up and put it there. She got a job in a garage there, answering the phone and being the cashier. Gradually, she was left alone in the trailer a lot. Evenings, because he started getting out and around. What a surprise. The reason she was seeing me was that she went to donate blood and got called back, and they said she had an STD. They had very little money and no insurance and couldn't afford to pay for the treatment. She came to ask if I could help her out. Laura said, "I know I got a lot of nerve, asking you for help, considering everything, but my family won't even talk to me. I got no place left to turn. You always had a good heart, Vince, and I was hoping you might be willing to help me. I suppose I might have been entitled to gloat, but that just ain't my way. Hell, I'd help a casual acquaintance in trouble. Surely I could do something for the mother of my child. The person I'd lived with for 22 years. There was a little bit of feeling left in there. I told her I hadn't gotten through the divorce yet, so she was still on my company insurance as my wife. I gave her a copy of my insurance ID card and told her it was okay to use it. She thanked me. Then she asked me what I thought Glenn could do. I said he should go to County General and walk in and tell them he needed testing and treatment and tell them what he made. They'd take him and send him a bill. If he couldn't pay it, they'd write it off as a pauper's debt. She asked me if I was seeing anyone, and I said that was off limits. She was quiet for a while and then said that she was sorry for everything. "I wish I could explain about what I said in that letter," she said. "I was feeling guilty about dumping you, and I had to turn it around and make it your fault. That's why I was so very mean and said all that stuff that I said. The worst stuff I said wasn't true at all, and I knew that. All of that was from Glenn, the way he worked on me to turn me against you. You have no idea how jealous of you he always has been. He kept screwing up his life, and you just had it all. Wife, good job, lovely daughter to be proud of, the works. He always was just playing you and trying to show you up, while pretending to be your friend, and you were too nice a guy to figure it out. He worked on me for months, and got me to sneak around and screw him. Then he got me to leave you for him, so he could brag that he was a better man and lover than you. And stupid me didn't realize what he was up to. I thought that he loved me, and so I went along with whatever he wanted me to do. But that wasn't enough, so he had me write the note like that to rub it in and put you down. He figured you'd be all screwed over by me hitting you below the belt like that. So he told me what to say. I exaggerated some things and didn't really mean some things. But I wasn't happy with myself and what I had been doing. So like I said, I had to make you the bad guy and make up those faults in you as the reason why I was a cheat. Vince, even as I was doing it, the sneaking around and all, and then leaving you with the letter to remember me by, I knew I was messing up my life. I don't know what it was, but Glenn just always seemed to have a hold on me. "Can you ever forgive me?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "A little, but not most of it. And I can't forget it. I can't forget you going out of your way to make me feel like a worthless piece of shit and a failure as a husband and a man. And then sharing it with all your friends to pass around. That was the lowest of the low. Everyone in town got to read that letter. Compared to that, cleaning out all our money was nothing. Laura, all you had to do was come to me and say that you loved someone else and wanted to be with him. I'd have been hurt, but what was I going to do? Lock you up? And when I look back on all the time we had together, when I guess you were becoming more and more unhappy with me, I can't remember a single time when you ever really sat me down and complained about these things. If you ever loved me and wanted to save our marriage, all you had to do was sit me down and talk honestly to me. You were always at me for not communicating, but you never said anything like, "Vince, I'm not happy with the way you spend so much time out with your friends and not with me." That would have been right, and now I see it as selfish of me to have been doing that. I'm not so stubborn that I wouldn't have tried to make some changes, but you never gave me a chance. You just held it in, and eventually you started cheating on me with Glenn. I don't know how long that was going on. You said for a year, but I'm thinking it was longer than that. Sometimes, I even wonder if Jenna is mine or Glenn's. Oh God, no. Vince, I would never have lied to you about that. I did start with Glenn a long time ago. We'd do it and break off, all behind your back. But Jenna is yours, no question about that. Okay, I'm relieved about Jenna, but that's about it. The rest of your story doesn't make me feel any better. It's like I never knew you. And cheating on me all that time? I said. Some people were sure to find out. You made me a public spectacle, a cuck. And you never even tried to talk your gripes out with me. I guess it was easier and more fun to just run off to Glenn and his big Johnny. It came down to you just wanting that big meat, didn't it? Laura didn't answer, which told me her answer. I said, you'll be on my insurance for about 5 or 6 months, until the divorce becomes final. After that, you'll have to do whatever you have to do about getting your own insurance. You'll have to find a job with benefits. You're still a nice-looking woman, Laura. Maybe if you ever get over your fascination with Glenn's big meat, you may get lucky and find some other guy who will love you and want to take care of you. I hope you don't go running around on him. But I'll tell you this, Laura. That guy ain't ever gonna be me. I saw her face fell. Can you believe it? God, how clueless was this woman? Did she actually ever think that I might take her back? I have found a keeper in Nora Ashford. So that answers your question from before, I said. We're still dancing around a little about whether we love each other enough to take the plunge, but that's going to be resolved soon. I'm not unsure anymore. We have a good time together, and we're going to keep on doing that. And someday, very soon, I'm going to get down on my knees and beg Nora to marry me. I'm not as much of a boring, lazy, ugly, disgusting, fat slob as I used to be, but I'm still a needle willy compared to old Glenn. And you know what? She seems to like my needle willy just fine. Laura said something I couldn't quite catch and hurried away from me. Maybe it was thanks, but it didn't sound like it. So that was that with Laura. Now for Glenn. If this was one of those revenge stories, I'd be out there doing a Rambo number on his butt. But this is real life, and it ain't quite that neat and tidy. I told you before how I was going to talk about what a selfish prick he was. Well, you'd think the fact that he was supposedly my best friend but was tapping my wife for God knows how long would be good evidence. But there's even better. In the beginning, he was undermining my marriage on the quiet. Then he ramped it up by making it public, with him and Laura running off together. Right? Okay, that made him a selfish prick and me a public cuck. But here's what really shows how big a selfish prick he was. They took off on a Monday in early January. That Sunday before that Monday was the last regular season game for the Bears. With me so far? Okay, that Sunday night, after the game, he didn't get shit-faced with me. He had a beer and then took off. What he did was call Laura to tell her to pack, because they were leaving during the day Monday while I was working. So, what you ask? They could have gone any time, any day for months and months. All they needed was for me to be gone to work. Any day would have done. But he waited to run off that day, just because he wanted to wait so's he could use his last Bears ticket. He's been wrecking a marriage of 22 years, and the highest priority he has is getting to see a football game. Is that the ultimate selfish prick, or what? He's been telling Laura how much he loves her. But he wanted to delay their running away to see a football game because he'd already paid for the ticket and he doesn't want it to go to waste. I don't know if Laura ever knew where she stood on his list of priorities. I do know this. If Rex Grossman hadn't thrown that fourth-quarter interception and the Bears had made a playoff wild-card game, Glenn wouldn't have made that phone call for at least another week. What a guy. That takes the cake. Now, for the frosting on the cake. One day in late May I got a call on my cell phone. I didn't recognize the number, so I flipped open the cover. Vince? Look, Vince, this is Glenn. Please don't hang up on me. I know you must hate my guts, and I don't blame you. Truth is I'm ashamed of myself for what I did. I didn't say anything. It was his phone call, so let him do all the talking. I guess you heard about that STD thing. Well, that kinda did it for Laura. She moved out and wouldn't sleep with me for a while. Not until I got treated and cured. I qualified as a pauper because I was between jobs at the time. I didn't know whether you knew about that. Like I would care? What was he telling me all this for? Look, Vince, about Laura. Don't blame her so much. I really did a number on her, and I always found her easy to manipulate. I mean, no matter what, she really still does love you. Glenn, I interrupted. Just shut up about Laura, okay? That train has left the station. I was reading between the lines. One of them was dumping the other, or they were agreeing to split up, and Glenn was trying to act like he was a good guy. Glenn, what did you call me about? Well, I was wondering, I guess you still own the rights to those Bears season's tickets, right? I couldn't say a word. I couldn't believe this a-hole. He wanted to know if he could go in with me on the tickets for next season. I tamped down my anger and said, well, I had to send in the full payment at the end of March, Glenn, but I scraped up the Glenn. So you want to buy one of them, like you used to? Well, yeah. Sure thing, Glenn. No problem. You just come to my house with your half of the bread and hand it to me. I'd rather just send you a check. Oh, no, Glenji. You can't do anything by remote control. You have to come personally and hand it to me. As in close enough to me to hand it over. What's the matter, Glenn? You got me by 3 inches and maybe 20 pounds. Don't tell me you're afraid to get within my reach. I've heard you bragging what a great fighter you are. You say that all the time when you're shit-faced. You've told me a dozen times or more how you could kick my butt. What are you afraid of? I was thinking of all those hours on the Bowflex machine. Come over and walk up to me and hand me the money. A-hole. Show some guts. If you're still standing at the end of that conversation, I'll give you both the season's tickets for free. I heard a click as Glenn hung up. Shit. I thought I might have had a free shot at him. Okay, that was the frosting on the cake. Now, here's the colored sprinkles that go on top of the frosting. Remember how Laura's so-called job was Tuesdays through Fridays? Only she spent them him in his trailer? Okay, why not Monday? He never told her, but I knew. Think way back to what I told you about how those football Sundays went. So we'd go to the games together. When we won, we'd drink to Brian Urlacher, the best middle linebacker ever. When we lost, we'd curse out that idiot Rex Grossman. Then we'd get shit-faced at Benny's bar afterwards and pass out after we staggered home. That was it. Glenn didn't want to have to go and screw my wife on Mondays because he was still hungover from the Bears games on Sundays and all the drinking afterwards. It would have been inconvenient. He would have to have gotten up instead of sleeping in. Some great lover. Huh? Fact is, Nora and I had gone in halfsies on the Bears tickets. That fall we went to the games together. She wasn't a true Bears believer, but she was fun to hug whenever anything happened, whether good or not. We didn't care. Any excuse for a hug worked for us. So that was that. Nothing much left to tell you. On the personal side, we were wearing ourselves out with all the sex, from day one. But I was just like a horny bridegroom and I never got tired of her. Nor she of me. I'm only human, and sometimes I got worn down every once in a while. So I just said so, and then we'd cuddle and spoon. It didn't matter to her or me. We just wanted to be together. I lost 26 pounds overall, and then my body stabilized there. One day, Nora said that I was looking like a Greek god. Like a dummy. I asked, which one? She said, Bacchus. Always a wise ass. My divorce went final in July, and Nora informed me we were getting married in September. Why so long? I deadpanned. She pounded my arm and called me a smartass. Then she said it would take that long to get the dress and other arrangements done. Actually, from what Jenna and some other ladies told me, Nora pulled off a near miracle getting a dress and the other arrangements set up so soon. So then we got married and lived happily ever after. Just like that. So, that's the story. The end, I guess. Let's quickly check what Nora has to add. Okay, our company, Telco, was not doing real well. We had some hot competitors and were always battling to defend our shrinking market share. We had real problems. Repair costs were way too high. We had a miserable reputation for customer service. Our customer base was shrinking. Our stock price was at an all-time low. The CEO of Telco, Mr. Marshall Sinclair, sent down some high-priced independent consultants, and they came to the offices and wanted to see all of the maintenance records. Well, that brought them to me and the girls in the maintenance database. They looked at all the records. Then they talked to me and the girls who worked under me and asked us what we thought about the maintenance problems. Well, you can imagine how we felt about that. They actually wanted to know what we thought. So we told them. And eventually everything kept coming back to Vince. He was the curve breaker. Hell, he created the damned curve. Why him? They asked. Because he was honest, we said. He did his job the best way he knew how on every job on every day. And he is always finding little ways to do a job better and faster, even after over 20 years on the job. They asked, okay, then if he was so good, how come his productivity, which had already been among the highest, suddenly jumped up on this one day in the first week in January, and then 2 weeks later suddenly jumped up even higher? I said I had to recuse myself. Recuse yourself? Yes. I had to recuse myself because I was pretty damned biased when it came to my Vince. I let the girls take over. Well, Matty Lyons told the consultants, the first jump was because he got rid of some excess baggage and really started working at being the best of the techs. Translation, Sadie Blevins added. His wife left him, and he got even more serious about what was important to him. He was going through a real bad time, and he decided all he had left was his pride in his work. So he decided he was gonna be the best tech at Telco. Pardon my French. The second jump came when he met and fell in love with an extremely lucky woman, she said, sticking her tongue out at me. After that, Sadie said, Vince just decided to take it up one more notch. He decided he wanted to be the absolute best tech ever. And he did that to make a certain extremely lucky woman very proud of him. I know I blushed. It was true. Vince did it to show off for me, to make me proud of him, to show me how much he cared for me. Well, the consultants wrote all this down. Then they asked why the rest of the techs were so second-rate. What did they do that was different from Vince? And we told them. We told them everything. The padded hours, the secret part-time work done on company time, the hounds, the little black market components repair scam. That puzzled the consultant team leader. But why did your director of maintenance put up with this? Surely he must have realized what was going on. I unexcused myself and jumped back in. I said, look, Tony Franco had been an average tech on his best day, but he was a great brown-noser. He kissed butt and got a promotion to a job that he was clueless about, running my section, but he left us alone. Then he got another brown-nose promotion to where he was our boss, the director of maintenance. He had all the techs working for him, and he had us in the maintenance database section. You asked why Tony put up with all the tech scams. Well, back when he was a tech, he did all that stuff himself, so he didn't see anything wrong with it being done. I tried to show him how it ran our maintenance costs up, but he just didn't believe me. Tony is a unique mix, stubborn and stupid, along with being incompetent. I started to explain about the Peter principle, but they already knew about that. The COO and the other telco top management screamed when the consultants made their report and gave their recommendations. Mr. Sinclair, the CEO, came down from New York armed with the report. Then he forced the resignation of the COO and took on that job himself. There were several more resignations and demotions and dismissals. The COCO followed most of their recommendations, and the biggest one of all from our point of view was to fire my boss, Tony Franco, for incompetence. And they promoted guess who to be the new director of maintenance? Vince Moretti. That's who. They also bumped the position up to the VP level and made Vince responsible for both maintenance and customer services. There was some little hassle about that move putting Vince as my boss, because by now everyone knew about us being an item. It was contrary to the telco policies and procedures, but Vince got that all squared away in his first big meeting. First of all, he refused to wear a suit to the meeting. He breezed in wearing a telco logo shirt and chinos. New ones, with a smaller waist. I'd gotten about 22 pounds off him by then, and what a time we had, doing it. A couple of the other VPs jumped on him about the dress code, but Vince fired right back. He said he was going to be out in the field a lot, and going to people's houses a lot, and the suit thing was impractical for the one, and too intimidating for the other. And besides, he said, he didn't like to wear suits. He didn't consider them work clothes. When those same two VPs tried to pressure him, he told them they could kiss his butt. He said that they had been watching the company going down the tubes for years and had sat with their thumbs up there, but while collecting their big fat paychecks, all while wearing their suits and worrying about their dress code. They had seen the growing problems in customer service and the cost of maintenance. Why hadn't they done anything? Mr. Sinclair sat quietly, watching this exchange. The VPs appealed to him to reprimand Vince for his incivility. Instead, he told them he was putting them on probation while he was going over their performance. In a last whine, they also brought up the thing about Vince being my boss, me being his fiancé and all. It was contrary to the telco policies and procedures, they pointed out. Mr. Sinclair asked Vince to rewrite the PNP. I helped him. After that, Vince really went to work. All of those years that he had worked at telco, Vince had seen almost all of the problems that made telco second-rate. He had talked to his boss and written memos about what he saw wrong and how to make things right. But Tony Franco had no vision and no desire to take any action. It wasn't broke that bad, so why bother fixing it, was his approach. He saw Vince as a troublemaker, someone trying to make him look bad. He had always resented Vince's abilities as a tech, which far outshone his own. So he tossed out all of Vince's ideas. He ridiculed them to the other complacent managers and executives. He characterized Vince as an overambitious nutjob. Now that Tony was out of the way, Vince had a head full of ideas and the clout to do something about them. He called all the techs together and laid down the law. They'd either clean up their act or he'd find new techs to replace them. He gave them job sheets listing all the kinds of tasks they did, with a time range assigned to each. Come in within the range, and you were okay. Put down a time over the outside of the range, and you would have a personal discussion with Vince. He would give you a real chance to explain, but since he was totally familiar with the work, it was impossible to snow him. If he agreed with your explanations, you got an okay on your worksheet. There were some techs that he did eventually fire. They just didn't get it or couldn't do it to his liking. To replace them, he followed the advice of the Human Resources Department and put ads in the paper and went on the job search websites. Some resumes trickled in, but not too many applicants met his high standards. Then, finally, he got to thinking about his Navy background and got an idea. He Googled around until he found a website that listed sailors of various technical rates who were nearing retirement. He emailed them and sent telco recruiters to talk to them. He hired most of them. There were quite a few telco techs who quietly found jobs elsewhere on their own. They didn't want to work as hard as he required. He found replacements for them the same way as for the guys he canned. Within 3 months, of the 195 techs on the books, 87 of them were these new hires, all of them former military technicians. The remaining techs got the message. Overall productivity went up. Vince didn't expect them to reach his numbers, but his goal was between 85% and 90% of his pre-letter standards. The numbers slowly went up and settled at 78 to 79%. Then he began giving out performance bonuses for top 5 performances. The numbers stabilized at around 88%. He rewrote the maintenance policy. Instead of replacing failed equipment and scrapping the failed items, he had the techs bring the failed items back to the plant for repair evaluation. Instead of replace and toss, it was replace and repair. In his part-time job, he'd worked with some men and women with handicaps and had been impressed with their work ethic and skills. He set up an in-house component repair center and staffed it with a number of disabled workers. They were able to repair and refurbish over 70% of the returned items. The cost of new equipment procurement eventually dropped by 64%. He also instituted a serial number tracking system for the phone equipment. Everything used in their hardware had a serial number, right down to the small subcomponents. He had all the records dug out of the storage boxes and got the serial numbers for all the installed hardware entered into a database. He paid people overtime to get that done. There was some grumbling over the additional costs, but Mr. Sinclair stood silent and okayed it. Vince set up stealth buyers to seek out and buy the refurbished former telco equipment from the internet resellers. He concentrated on the major items, the phone instruments, and the switchboards. He was able to match up the serial numbers with the job sheets. From the serial number database, he knew when that item had first been installed and where. So whoever had the later work order for that customer and replaced that item was the tech who had taken that item and sold it to the internet reseller. That led to almost 80 techs quitting to avoid prosecution. Vince had a file of qualified technicians waiting to fill those jobs. Now of the 195 techs, 162 were the new retired military techs. By then, Vince was receiving resumes from retiring techs who had heard about the good jobs he was offering. Word was getting around. As an added benefit to telco, these retired Navy men already had health care plans and retirement pay and benefits. Vince knew it was customary in the industry to lowball retirees with pensions. They got offered salaries at less than the going rate, because they already had a substantial income, was the argument. Vince offered a different deal. He offered them competitive salaries. And if they opted out of the company's healthcare and dental plan and used their government healthcare and dental coverage, he'd pay them a 10% bonus every year of their employment. The 10% bonus would come out of the cost savings he was garnering and was a small percentage of the savings and benefits, since like most companies, telco subsidized the healthcare insurance costs. A side benefit of these reforms was that they put the last of the underhanded schemes out of business. The source of parts completely dried up. It was confirmed that the guys who had been handling the reworked components were Sully and his brother-in-law, who were the internet resellers. At the end of the first full quarter of Vince's reforms, the maintenance costs had dropped by 28%, even after factoring in the costs to enter the serial number data. Mr. Sinclair was watching the revenue and cost numbers and was extremely pleased with Vince's reforms. When Vince had been a tech, he had met over the years with hundreds and hundreds of telco customers, many of them angry over getting the runaround by the telco customer service representatives. The CSRs were low-paid, poorly trained, and not particularly motivated to be helpful. He had patiently listened to a ton of complaints. After that first great quarter, and armed with those experiences, Vince turned his attention to the customer service department. He and Nora spent a weekend hosting the head of the CSD, Wilma Fatala, a woman who had come up through the ranks in telco. Her reward for cleaning up an accounting department mess some 6 years before was being assigned to manage the CSD. It was no plum. The budget was inadequate for all of the improvements that she hungered to make. Hell, it was inadequate to perform the modest tasks it was currently responsible for. She was an extremely frustrated woman. She knew that the resolution of the accounting department mess had made 2 VPs look bad. The CSD and its meager budget had been more of a punishment than a promotion, all at their instigation. Under the new organization, she and her department now worked for Vince. They planned and plotted all one weekend. Vince and Wilma got all of the CSRs together during the workday. They shut down the CSR service line for the afternoon with a recorded message to leave a voicemail description of the problem being reported. That was not much worse than what customers generally encountered when they called in with problems. The first thing they did was announce a new salary structure. Effective immediately, there was a 12% increase in everyone's wages. With Mr. Sinclair's permission, Vince was using some of the savings and maintenance costs to finance the added payroll cost. From that day forward, there would be a system of annual basic increases and incentive pay bumps for very good work. Now that they had the CSR's attention, Wilma and Vince played hours of recorded CSR calls from the past 2 years. Many of the CSRs were shocked to hear how they sounded. Not in vocal quality, but in lack of real interest and concern for the client's problems. When asked, they agreed that calls like those would never get a CSR bonus. Repeatedly poor calls like those would lead to counseling, retraining, and possible dismissal. Message received. Then Wilma set up training sessions. With the new motivation of the salary increase and the carrot of the incentive pay bumps for better work, some of the CSRs improved dramatically. Some did not. They were counseled and retrained, but many of them eventually were let go. When their replacements were sought, the usual recruiting approaches produced little. As with the techs, Vince and Wilma were looking for workers with high personal work ethics and motivation. Most people thought of the CSR job as a stepping stone to other jobs, but Vince saw it as the primary point of contact with the public. You are the voice, almost the face of telco, Vince explained. How you treat the customers or potential customers is seen as telco's public face. Wilma's, mine, and Mr. Sinclair's. When Nora mentioned their recruitment problem in passing to one of the new ex-Navy techs, he suggested canvassing their wives, his and the other ex-servicemen's. They were largely empty nesters with free time. As service wives, they were adaptable and used to getting along in many environments. They replenished the ranks of the CSRs and brought some welcome maturity. And as with their husbands, there was an added benefit to telco. As wives of retirees with healthcare and other benefits, they could opt out of the telco benefits program. In exchange, Vince promised them a 10% bonus each year. By the end of the year, 3 quarters after Vince took over his new responsibilities, telco had reduced maintenance costs to 22% below its competitors, and customer satisfaction with the performance of the CSR department and the company in general was rapidly rising. With their reduced costs and excellent productivity figures, telco competed for and won 3 large contracts to completely install all the telecommunications systems in a trio of commercial building complexes. The value of telco stock was rising again. The stockholders were pleased. Vince's executive methods were unorthodox, and he lacked polish, but Mr. Sinclair, the CEO, was beginning to believe in him. Over his long successful career, Mr. Sinclair had benefited by an uncanny eye for potential managerial and executive talent. He thought he recognized great potential in Vince. In his former positions, he had seen and evaluated dozens of skilled executives. It was no problem to seek out what he wanted. 2 former top executives who had lost interest in running the whole show. They had retired, but were itchy to get back into action in some less stressful way. One, Roger Platt, was a former highly effective COO, and the other, Jim Hartman, was a former CFO, a financial guru. He told them about what Vince had been doing and that he was looking for mentors. They agreed to test the situation. He brought them into telco with vague titles and introduced them to Vince. After a lengthy lunch that turned into a late dinner meeting as well, they had come together on a plan to groom and tutor Vince for advancement. He was going to get on-the-job training for higher management. Mr. Sinclair fired the 2 laggard VPs and found people within the company who were eager to take their shot at the jobs. Vince knew them as good people who did their best for their people and the company. His 2 gurus mentored them in Vince. Within months, they were de facto reporting to Vince for direction, even though he was co-equal with them on the organization chart. They had no problem with that. Vince was seen throughout all of telco as some kind of managerial genius who was turned their fortunes around with his cost savings and service productivity improvements, with the vastly improved customer satisfaction levels as a plus. To Nora, Mr. Sinclair, and the others close to him, Vince kept saying that he was no genius. These things, the changes he had made and was making, seemed so obvious to him that he was amazed that no one had ever thought of them or tried them. Mr. Sinclair and his mentor's advisors were now working on a 1-year plan. Mr. Sinclair gave up the second hat as COO. He promoted Mr. Platt to be the new COO and promoted Vince up to a new position as deputy COO. In fact, Vince would be handling most of the COO responsibilities and Mr. Platt would provide oversight and mentoring. The idea was to give Vince a chance to develop some executive polish and become comfortable with the financial side of running a business, something that was completely new to him. For that, Mr. Hartman was his guru and mentor. There was a running joke in telco, appreciated at all levels, to the effect that slowly and inexorably, they were going to force Vince into wearing a suit. The year-end stockholders meeting was drawing near and Vince was told he was required to attend to be introduced as part of the new telco top management team. The rumor was that Mr. Sinclair was going to publicly announce that Mr. Platt would be retiring by the time of the next stockholders meeting, and that Vince was in line to be promoted to COO at that time. Many of the telco employees were stockholders, and they sent a strong contingent to the Chicago meeting site. The promotion plans were a poorly kept secret, and many people wanted to be there to see one of their own be properly rewarded. And they also wanted to see Vince in a suit. Nora, now Mrs. Vince Moretti, would not say a word to her friends about it. When asked about the suit, its color and style, she smiled. The meeting droned on through the normal housekeeping activities and a review of the past year's overall performance, which brought applause. Mr. Hartman made a presentation on the past year's revenues and profitability and announced an increase in the stock dividends, which brought more than a few cheers. At last came the most anticipated item on the agenda, the introduction of the new telco top management team. Mr. Sinclair first announced the promotions and realignments, all of which were already known. Then he drew out the suspense as long as he could. He introduced senior staff members and described their new and realigned responsibilities. Finally, he introduced the new COO and his deputy. Roger Platt and Vince Moretti came out onto the stage. Neither was wearing a suit. Instead, they were identically dressed, wearing dark gray trousers and dark blue blazers, with the classic telco logo embroidered on the breast pocket. Vince looked down into the audience at his beautiful wife, who had helped him plan and execute the little sartorial surprise, and mouthed, "I love you." 1 year later, Vince was installed as the new COO. Again, he wore the telco logo blazer, as did every one of the telco executives and managers. Suits were optional, but everyone wanted to show their solidarity with the new man in charge. And there was a slight surprise. Roger Platt declined to retire. He said he was having too much fun working with Vince to walk away. Instead, he switched jobs with Vince, taking the deputy COO position. That way, he could continue to back up and mentor his young friend, and continue to enjoy seeing telco's fortunes rise. By the end of Vince's first year as telco's top operational executive, telco was challenging their main rival to become the dominant telecommunications company of its size in the country. Just like that. Afterward, Mr. Sinclair and his wife took Vince and Nora out one evening after Vince had taken over. They had a fine dinner, and the two wives went off to the restroom for some girl talk. The CEO smiled at his younger friend. "Well, Vince, how does it feel? Like I'm going to wake up someday and find that this is all a dream," Vince said. "I still can't quite believe that I could just walk in and make all these changes and kick butt and shake everything up and you just smile and keep rewarding me. I feel like someday you're going to walk in and say, 'Nice try, Moretti, but there's no way you can be the COO of an outfit like Telco.'" Sinclair seemed genuinely surprised. "Why not?" "Well, I've seen enough of the board and the other executives at other companies to realize that I will never be like them. I talk like a grunt. I have no patience with the niceties of boardroom behavior. I tell people exactly what I think of them. I am not tactful. I am not diplomatic. Over the long haul, I'm not sure I can fit in, the way a COO should." Sinclair shook his head. "Vince, you are mistaking a few details of social behavior for job performance. All those other executives have learned to look and talk and dress like that as a matter of rather privileged upbringing. I know. I'm one of them. And you have seen me get rid of a few of them. For someone in my position, those attributes mean nothing when it comes to running a company. What I need in my top man is one simple thing: the ability to solve problems. Everything else is secondary. And solving problems is what you do, Vince. You said the Navy taught you how to troubleshoot. Well, that's what you have been doing for me at Telco. And that's exactly what I needed done. You've made a few mistakes, but you've learned fast and recovered fast. Oh, under some circumstances, the lack of those attributes and social graces could possibly isolate someone like you and create barriers to being able to do your work. But that's not going to happen at Telco. I'm protecting you from the top and the outside, and Roger has your back in everything else. Although I have to say, I haven't had to do much protecting when it comes to the stockholders. They think you are a miracle man. Value is up, dividends are strong, and we are going to stay on top of our market. No, Vince, this is no dream. You are a unique man, and this company is a perfect place for you. I see nothing but a bright future for you. And me and all the other people whose lives are tied up with Telco." He raised his glass to Vince as the women returned. "What are we drinking to?" asked Mrs. Sinclair. "To our miracle man COO, Vince Moretti." The women raised their glasses in tribute and drank. But Vince caught a devilish glint in Nora's eyes that presaged some unmerciful teasing when they got back home. He smiled. He loved the way Nora teased. He knew he was in for a long night. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.